For the past 4 months, I've been building a steampunk world. Airplanes, trains, automated farming, even a cake factory. These are some of the things I've constructed over the course of 1,000 in-game Minecraft days. Join me as I review the rise of progress in the Modpack, Steampunk Minecraft. You want to play mod packs with friends, but you can't seem to find a good server. And the free ones? With the big mod packs these days, free servers are just too laggy. Luckily for you, there's BISECT hosting. They host my server, and with plenty of affordable options, they can host your server too. And the best part is, they support almost every mod pack. Use code Doublesal at checkout for 25% off your first order. BISECT hosting, a great site for great servers. Now that right there, I appreciate little things like that. That logo, just stuff like that makes the game feel alive. Anyways, looks like we're in a redwood forest. Well, if you play the game long enough, then you know what the typical Minecraft protocol is. Crafting table, tools, and hello, what's this? You can see the blocks on the table and a projection of the item. Okay, now that's pretty neat. Ugh, Illager. Better get out of his way. Honestly, the last thing I need right now is to get pierced by an arrow from this random mob. Move, just go away, and all is well with the world again. Okay, we're gonna mine some cobblestone for these much-needed tool upgrades. And that right there, that looks like a wizard tower. Do I dare explore? Okay, what's inside? Probably a wizard. You know, it is a wizard tower. At least that's what I'm guessing it is. I mean, it's a lonely tower in the middle of the woods. What else could it be? I'm gonna mine this and, oh, secret trapdoor. Hopefully something cool, and there he is, the wizard of said wizard tower. Come on, with 2.5 hearts and no food, I'm not gonna try that. But I do need to go mining, and this cave looks like just the spot to do that. Bauxite ore? I don't know what that is, but I'm taking it. Fingers crossed, it's something that we're gonna need later. Okay, but I really need some food right now. Thankfully there's a herd of pigs. Herd? Flock? What do you even call a group of pigs anyways? What does it matter? When there's only one pig left, well, that's not much of a group, is it? And yes, for obvious reasons, I am gonna leave that one alive. I guess we can make do with a couple of pork chops. Oh, is that a player head? Okay, hopefully this isn't a decoration and I can actually eat this. And I can, okay, that's good. I haven't cooked the pork chops yet, so these little watermelon slices, they'll do as a temporary snack. Okay, looks like there's another cave over there. I'm gonna dive and, oh, I take a deep breath. An achievement for jumping in the water. Interesting. Thin air? Okay, one thing I should mention is that when I was exploring this mod pack, there was a mechanic with the air in the game. So this is how air works in real life. Let's say you're climbing Mount Everest. Well, the higher you climb, the thinner the oxygen gets, meaning it becomes more difficult to breathe. Now, they've implemented that mechanic into the game, and honestly, I don't even know what to look out for to monitor our oxygen levels. I mean, we have a health bar, a hunger bar, but there's no air bar, so you know what, we'll figure it out as we go. It looks like dinner's ready. Too bad I'm gonna have to take it to go, but the cave awaits. My only concern is the oxygen issue, because I do know that when you descend, you also have to watch your oxygen as well. Now that, I don't know if that's a thing in real life, but for some reason in this one, the deeper we go, I guess it becomes harder to breathe as well. You know what, at this point I'm ranting. I'll mine the copper. So that cave was nothing more than a dead end. I did spot a second cave a few blocks over, but I am gonna need some torches before I go exploring again. Thankfully coal isn't too hard to find. One of my favorite things about playing with shaders is that when you craft torches, and then you equip them in your offhand, they illuminate the area around you. Perfect for cave exploring because you don't have to waste so many— Is that Makima from Chainsaw Man? No, that can't be a coincidence. That has gotta be Makima. If you haven't read Chainsaw Man, go ahead and give it a read, or you can watch the anime. Either way, it's really good. I'm just gonna get some of this iron, some of this copper, and that looks like Skulk. So I'm looking at the mini-map, and it looks like there's structures down there. Probably a deep dark city. The question is, do I dare explore further? Getting killed by the warden this early in the game is anything but ideal. I guess I could go a little further. I mean, this area is basically free XP. Ooh, I forgot about the Skulk sensors. I think I'll be okay. I mean, we're not even in the city yet. And, oh, nope, that's it. Time to go. Okay, I just gotta get out of his range, and I think I'll be okay. Just have to get away from this dark pulsing around me. What was that? I just randomly took damage. I don't like this. Okay, whoa, why am I taking so much damage? There's nothing around me. Somehow I'm gonna die. Wait a minute. Did you guys see that? Hold on a second, did you guys catch that? Well, mystery solved, everyone. I wanted to know if there was a way we could monitor our oxygen levels, and I guess there is. It's just the air meter. You know, when you go into the water and the bubbles appear above your hunger bar, that's all it is. I don't know how I missed it. And I don't know what that thing is, but it's making me uncomfortable. It's so good to finally be out of that cave. Too bad the sun had to set on me. Well, at least there's the shelter over there. I just hope the area is peaceful and not some type of enemy camp. Haha, perfect. Got a bed, some chests, and whoa! That is way more loot than I was expecting. I never trade with villagers, so I don't know what I'm gonna do with the emeralds, but I'm sure we can find a use for them in one of these mods. What a beautiful morning for exploration. An emu. Huh. Neat. And a village in the distance. Don't mind if I do. There's gotta be something good around here. What about this spot? This must be some type of post office? There are packages everywhere. The question is, what's inside the packages? Huh. Well, that's a little disappointing. Don't mind me. I'll see myself out. Alright, no more messing around. It's time to build a house. And I think this is gonna be an ideal spot. Right by the river. The land is pretty flat, so that's perfect to build on. We don't have to do a lot of terraforming there, but we are gonna have to get rid of a lot of this grass. I'm gonna clear this out and see what we can do with this area, because honestly, I want to build something different. I'm not trying to go for the same type of granite build that we had in the other Create world. Let's try to, I don't know, get creative with this one. Ooh, what's that? Some type of jungle temple? Whatever it may be, I'm gonna go check it out. Now, the one thing you have to be mindful of every time you explore some type of abandoned ruin of any kind is that there are always gonna be traps. Hidden traps. But sometimes they're not hidden very well. Okay, well, everything up here seems to be clear, so let's go further. But not before I light up this little campfire. You know, sometimes you can do things and it'll trigger secret passages. Huh. Well, it was worth a shot. I am gonna be hitting the ground a lot though. Gotta make sure that I break up any tripwires I may miss. Look, do you remember when I was saying that some of the traps are probably not that well hidden? Well, this is a great example of that. When you have a room full of pressure plates, well, that kind of gives away the element of surprise. Yeah, I'm just gonna clear a little path, breaking them one by one. You gotta be crazy if you'd actually want to step on them and see what they do. Now, I do want to see what they activate, but I'm not gonna step on them to find out. What I will do is break down this wall. Dispensers. You know what, just for fun. Good thing we broke the pressure plates. Alright, time to move on. Okay, looking around the corner, that is definitely a tripwire. It's probably connected to sticky pistons that will open up and drop us into lava. Time to cut. Whoa! No, that right there, that's clever. That is the power of the Create mod. It's such an interesting way to use that, too. Wow. The trap's gotta be on some type of timer, and eventually it's gonna open. Oh, yeah, there we go. Alright, moving on. No signs of danger. Okay, everything's looking good. An emerald block. I don't know if I trust it. I mean, you got a valuable block at the end of a long hallway in the middle of a ruined temple? Come on. If that's not a trap, I don't know what is. I want to mine it, but it's almost like if the temple creators want me to mine it. Better play it safe and mine all around. I guess it's clean. Okay, free treasure. Now, what is this? Some type of pit? You know what, I'm just gonna run across. It's taking way too long to get through some of these rooms. I made it. Okay, that went way better than expected. Usually when I rush things like that, it goes terribly wrong, but luck is on my side today. Alright, I'm pretty sure this is the last level because the stairs don't go any deeper. Gonna mine around it just to be safe. And there's nothing! Okay. I refuse to believe that's everything on this level, though. On the minimap, there is another room right next to me, so it's gotta be behind one of these walls. Yeah, okay. Looks like theory was correct. Although it doesn't look like there's much in this room either. But that's what they want us to think. Yay, more annoying silverfish. Love it! Just gonna back up here and... Oh! Okay. Looks like the problems took care of themselves. Let's go see what's in that room. Okay, that is definitely a trap. Just gotta make sure that I don't accidentally set anything off. I'm gonna mine under the chest, see if there's anything there, and that looks like a piston. There's probably something underneath that piston, so let's see what's under there, and that is a redstone block. Let's break that and see what's inside this puppy. That is a lot of emeralds. Oh my goodness. You know what, I would have preferred diamonds, but I'm not gonna be ungrateful. That was a good haul. Okay, time to get out of here. Just gonna put some of the stuff in the chest, and then after that, I'm gonna go have to look for a bed, because I haven't seen a single sheep. I'm just gonna help myself to some of this guy's food, take some apples, potatoes, and you know what? I think I may even help myself to this bed. Look at all that sugarcane. Okay, you know what? I don't really know what we're gonna use it for, but in the create mod, you do need to use sugarcane for something. So we're gonna make a little farm out of that real quick, and then we can get to the main event. Try to keep this looking as clean as possible. And then I am going to make a staircase. I don't like the way acacia wood looks. I would have preferred to use oak or spruce or something, but this is all we got, so I'm gonna have to make do. Eventually, I'm probably gonna swap out the stairs for something else, but until then, this is gonna do for now. So oak saplings are actually replaced by acorns in this mod pack, which I think is pretty clever. Hopefully the trees grow soon, because I'm not trying to work with acacia wood for the entirety of this video. I'm also hoping that we get nothing but small trees. It's just such a big hassle to have to cut down the big trees, and then you gotta make sure you break every log so that the leaves disappear. Now, I'm not entirely sure what I want to do for this house, but that's almost always the case when I build anything, so for the sake of tradition, I'm just gonna make it up as I go. Okay, we're gonna have wood planks for floors. That's pretty straightforward. What am I gonna use for the walls? I mean, I could use oak planks again, but that's kind of repetitive. I could probably use more stone. You know, a mesh of stone, cobblestone, smooth bricks. Yeah, I guess that could work. We'll have a little expansion out here, something like a porch or a patio. We're gonna have it fenced off, of course. Can't have the mobs coming in and ambushing me. And then back here, I don't know yet. Right now I'm just gonna make some columns, maybe connect them with some arches. Who knows, maybe I'll just leave it like that. That's probably gonna be the case depending on how nice they look. I do have some plans on making a garden behind that area, so yeah, I think that's what we'll have. A nice little colonnade. The only issue with the building like this is that it is going to take a while to collect all the stone. At least with wood, you can trade one log for 4 planks, whereas with stone, you gotta mine each block one by one. You know what though? Great things take time, so I'm gonna get a move on. Everything is looking nice and cozy here. Now the ceiling is usually the easy part when it comes to building a house. I mean, how can you mess up a ceiling? It's the roof. The part that goes above the ceiling, that one I've always had trouble with. It's coming up with the design, and then it's actually trying to figure out how to make the design work with blocks, because roofs are very angular, so hopefully I can come up with something that's simple and beautiful. Speaking of simple, I think this triangular type roof is going to be the easiest thing to do with the materials that we have. I'll make it out of oak planks like with what we have at the bottom there, and other than that, I think it's going to be pretty straightforward. Just have the roof go directly across. Nothing too fancy. Okay, I actually like the way this looks. Like I said, it's pretty simple, but it gets the job done. Maybe I'll leave a little gap up here, just so that we can have access to the roof. I want to make sure that I always have access up there, because who knows, maybe I'll add a second floor. It depends on how fast we advance and how much space we need, but it's a good thing to have. Okay, it's nighttime, and looking at the house from a distance, I think it's safe to say that this is a cozy little house we have here. Maybe we can extend the roof over to the colonnade just so it looks more integrated with the main structure. And see right here, this is why you need to have a ladder to the roof. Easy roof access. I can actually place the planks on top of the colonnade. And there we go. I think that looks fantastic. Okay, I'm gonna get off the roof because now there is one more thing I need to take care of. The base is still pretty vulnerable from the porch area, so I'm gonna craft myself some gates, put them on the entrance, and hopefully that should be enough to repel any enemies that try to get inside. That ought to do it, and yeah. Oh, right on time too. Look at that. Now that the gates are up, everybody wants to come inside. Well, at least it's doing its job. Safe and sound inside the gate. And there is the garden. Just a little simple cobblestone wall around, make it look a little ruined, and we have an assortment of vegetables. Onions, tomatoes, wheat, all the good stuff. And then we do have some farmland here, so I'm just gonna plant the rest of the potatoes and cook the rest inside. I'm getting pretty hungry. But we do have a lot of pumpkin pie from the jungle temple. Oh, look at that, it's 3D. And we can place it like cake? Alright, I can get behind this. This is how pumpkin pie should have always been. Now, one thing I do remember needing to craft was something called a hearth. It's part of the mod where you have to watch your oxygen and all that. I don't know exactly what it does, but I'm guessing that it... Wait a minute. Where are my baked potatoes? Why are they French fries? Oh, chips, excuse me. Anyways, back to the hearth. I'm guessing that it keeps the house warm based on the basic description I read, but I could be wrong. It's not that hard to craft. Furnace, iron, some cobblestone. Huh, can't place it on the floor. Wait, am I dumb? Am I supposed to wear this? Actually, no, I'm way off. Maybe on the wall? Oh, okay, yeah, that works too. So you're supposed to mount the hearth on the wall. Interesting interface. We got 2 bars and what looks like a fuel slot in the middle. That only filled it up just a fraction of the way, wow. Do I dare add more when I don't even know what it does though? Do we need this? Well, it's doing something because there's smoke coming up from the top. You know what, we got some coal, let's just put it all in. Okay, so it looks like we... Okay, so I was able to max it out. There's way more smoke coming out of the little chimney now. So the second slot is for water? How does that work? There's white little puff clouds, which I'm guessing is steam. Okay. Well, this is a very interesting looking block. It makes some great furniture, decorative blocks, but I don't really think we need this. So I'm going to move it out of the way, maybe put it in the chest room and build a chimney there. Okay, now for the good stuff. The stuff that was on the thumbnail and in the title of the video. The create aspect of this mod pack. So we got some stuff to claim before we get this mod pack started, like those milk and cookies. I mean, we just have to claim those. And then there's the usual stuff like the andesite casing that is the basis for every machine. But to do that, we need andesite, so it's time to start making our first step towards create by making a mine. Hopefully we can find some andesite at the bottom of this tunnel that I'm making. If not, well, then we're going to be out of luck and the video's over. So I haven't found any andesite yet, but I did come across this cave. Maybe we can find some stuff in here. Oh, and it looks like Makima is making a comeback. You know what, I don't feel like fighting a zombie right now, so I'm just gonna get out of here. Angie is chasing us. I guess we can spend the rest of our time claiming some of the rewards that we have, because we do have a few rewards. Okay, we got some coal. Alright, what else do we have here? Oh, a respirator. Don't mind if I do. I'm guessing that's gonna help us breathe underwater. Can we put this thing on? And yes, we can. Whoa, got a respirator. Nice. Alright, what's next? We have the Ring of 7 Curses, which gives us a bunch of debuffs, including weaker armor, more damage to us, and when we're on fire, we burn forever? Yeah, no thank you. We're just gonna do the other one instead. Yeah, let's just click that, and thank you. Alright, we got some andesite alloys, we got some shafts for the create stuff here, and yeah, there we go. And the machines are trying to fight back. I don't know if that's a robot. It looks like a robot. But I'm trying to get out of here, and it's going to kill me if I leave, so it has to die. So just, there you go, stay there, and okay. Last thing here, we're just going to add some railing because this stair is a safety hazard. Don't want to fall down there and break an arm or a leg. So we'll have the trapdoors there protecting us, and yeah, one more set right here, and it's done. And then last but not least, we need to beautify this area because just having grass here, it looks really weird. So we're going to break up the grass and we're going to put down some type of cobblestone path. Cobblestone down there, and then maybe we can incorporate some stone just so that the path has some texture. Maybe some rose bushes just to give this some color. I mean, we do have a lot of gray here, and well, gray's a little depressing. And lastly, let's make a path that goes straight to our sugarcane farm. And we'll put the stone slabs down there. Got to make every block count because stone is expensive. Put some fences just to make sure that the mobs don't get in. Granted, there are holes. I guess the fences are more decorative than they are protective. But last but not least, I say that again, torches. Got to make sure that this place is illuminated. And wow, look at that. We got a nice little rose garden, cobblestone path. It all looks great. The first task at hand is to finish this mine. I'm going to need a lot of resources in this video, so it's essential that we wrap this up and get this mine going. The mine is pretty much complete, and with that task out of the way, I can move on to some of the next important steps. The first one being crafting our first create items. Andesite alloys as well as andesite casings, 2 items which are fundamental to doing anything in the create mod. I also crafted some of the first machine parts, and then I went into the cave via our mine system. That's when I discovered a new block called Magnetite. It's a magnet, and this magnet has special uses, one of which is generating electricity. If you look at the diagram, you can see what's referred to as a generator coil. When the coil is surrounded by the magnets on all 4 sides, it begins to spin, producing electricity. It wouldn't be much of a steampunk world if we didn't harness the power of electricity, so I added some of that stuff to my inventory and kept going. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. Before we build any machines, we're first going to need a workshop, a place where we can craft more materials to make more contraptions. I laid down a cobblestone outline, then I put the project on hold because there was one contraption that I needed if I wanted to proceed. I needed a special cobblestone generator, but I didn't have the necessary parts to build one. But with the help of this small setup, I was able to start putting the pieces together. With the iron sheets, I began making some of our first machines like the mechanical saw, a block that can auto-mine trees for you if you know how to work it. I then went to the cave below and gathered some lava for the cobblestone generator. On the side of our future workshop, I placed the water, and then I made the classic rookie mistake of turning the lava into obsidian. Once I was able to work that out, I began setting up the create aspect of the generator, one that involved the use of drills. But before I powered it on, I began filling in the floor for the workshop. Once that task was finally wrapped up, I went to the backside of the workshop and started working on the mechanics for the drill. With some of the basic components that I had crafted earlier, I was able to get the rig up and running. You can never go wrong with a reliable water wheel. And finally, I had my first automated machine, an infinite cobblestone generator. But it could be a little bigger and make more cobblestone, so I decided to double its output by making 2 cobblestone generators side by side. Reason being was because I was going to need a lot of stone for this workshop. I wanted to base it off of the first house I had made, so this entire building was going to be made out of stone. I decided to leave it alone while it generated the cobblestone I needed. Meanwhile, I was drafting more plans for the next machine, one that was essential for building this structure. I wanted to smelt the stones and make them smooth without wasting any coal, so I decided to make a furnace that ran purely on lava. All you had to do was place an item in front of the flames and they would auto-smelt. And I'm so happy that this was actually implemented into Create, because if this wasn't there, then think about all the coal that I would have to waste. With the help of our furnace and our cobblestone generators, the building was finally taking shape. I descended from the staircase of the tower, went through the inside of the workshop because I wanted to see how the outside was looking, and I gotta say that the shape was perfect. It was everything I wanted it to be. But there was another material that was essential to move forward, that being kelp. So I took a boat, went out into the open ocean, and collected as much kelp as I could carry. Now the big question, why did I need kelp? Reason being, I needed it to make conveyor belts, and you can't do anything in Create unless you have a good supply of conveyor belts. You first have to put the kelp into a furnace and make it into dried kelp. With the dried kelp, you then arrange it in the following fashion and boom, you have conveyor belts. A crucial item that I was going to utilize later, but until then, it was time to add more machines to the workshop. Items like the mechanical mixer. But there was only one problem. When I hooked it up to the power source behind, it wasn't fast enough and the mixer didn't work. The gears needed to be spinning faster for the machine to work, which meant I needed a rotational speed controller, a block that adds extra speed to your machines. But crafting one was going to be quite the task, because there were a number of items that we first needed to create. But as complicated as it seemed, the first step was simple. I had to gather clay, and I had to gather sand. With the following items, I was going to make bricks as well as sandstone. When I combined them together, I made what was called kiln bricks. And with the kiln bricks, you combined 8 of them into one big block, and together they would form this type of super furnace. To combine all 8 blocks, I needed a hammer. And with the tool, all I would have to do was right-click a corner and all the blocks would merge. I right-clicked the corner, and all of a sudden I was greeted with this new interface for smelting and mixing metals. The metal of the day was bronze, made by mixing copper and zinc. I took the bronze to the mechanical press and had it flattened into sheets. With the sheets, I crafted a brass hand, a part we needed for a much larger machine. I added a little to the workshop, and then I came across this tribe of villagers. But these guys were armed to the teeth, so you better think twice before you steal from them. The next step involved me going deep into the caves, and for that, I was going to need an oxygen tank. And it was going to be pretty easy to fill it up with air. All we had to do was continuously twist the top with a shaft. Somehow that would pump air into the tank, and it would fill up in the course of 15 minutes. For the tank to work, I needed a special copper helmet, one that would allow me to breathe the air. The tank was full of air, and the helmet was on. I was now ready to venture into the deepest, darkest caverns of this Minecraft world. I hadn't even stepped off my front porch when all of a sudden I was attacked by this giant spider. I entered the cave with my fingers crossed, hoping that the oxygen tank would do its thing. Thankfully, all was well, and I even came across this monster dungeon spawning more Makima zombies. I went forward and turned around the corner only to find a secret room full of chests. And inside the chests was some pretty interesting loot, like this item called the Heart of an Iron Golem. You put this on and you get +4 armor points, only if you're not already wearing armor. I then found an essential item, one that I was looking for, diamonds. You can't go to the Nether unless you have obsidian, and you can't mine obsidian unless you have a diamond pickaxe. I also crafted a wrench. Basically, you can modify the blocks, and a toolbox, basically a shulker box. It doesn't have as much storage space, but hey, extra inventory space? That's still pretty valuable. Speaking of inventory space, we could have chest upgrades. All we have to do is take a regular chest, surround it with ingots. Take this copper chest, for example. Instead of 3 rows, you get 4. If you upgrade the copper chest with iron ingots, then you craft an even better chest. You see, 1 iron chest is the equivalent of 1 double chest. I sorted my items, then I went down to the cave to gather some obsidian. I poured water over the lava, when all of a sudden I started suffering from a heat stroke. My vision got blurry, and I started taking damage. Honestly, I forgot how impactful this temperature mod could be. Thankfully, I was able to find another source of obsidian at this ruined nether portal. I even found a couple of gold blocks and a chest with some pretty decent loot. I mined most of the ruined portal, and then I went back home and began working on the roof of the workshop. At first I was a little iffy about the design, but I figured I could make it work. Once I began adding the second roof, I then realized that this was exactly what I wanted to go for. I used to believe that less was more, but sometimes you have to make an exception to that rule. Especially when it comes to Minecraft rooftops. Speaking of adding more, there was another addition I wanted to make to the roof, that being tall chimneys. You know, smokestacks, kind of like with what you see in a factory. I built a pair of the two, adding campfires on top for that smoking effect. They enhanced the roof far better than I could hope for. I then put the obsidian to work by finally building the nether portal in the upper levels of my workshop. There were a couple of things I had to do before going into the portal. You see, remember that little lesson I learned about temperature? Well, the nether is probably extremely hot, meaning that I'm gonna need some type of way to keep myself cool. But you know me, I like to procrastinate, so instead of doing what I was supposed to be doing, I just decided to add even more to the factory, like finishing up the tower. I built it a little taller, even added a roof to it. I unintentionally made this look like a medieval building, even though this is Steampunk Minecraft, but you know what, let's just treat it like evolution. As I progress, the buildings are going to start looking more and more modern. Anyways, I wanted to make some modifications to this room over here, so I started by breaking down the kiln. I made a hole in the wall, and outside of the hole, I began building a foundation for the largest smokestack that I was going to add to this building. While I was in the middle of constructing that, I was attacked by an illager riding what looked like a flying illager monster? I don't even know what I'm looking at, but this thing was annoying. The type of annoying where you try to swat a fly with a fly swatter, but you just can't hit him because it flies too fast. That type. Anyways, here's a view of the completed chimney. The workshop is definitely giving more of a factory vibe. The next task was to make ice boxes. This was the key to entering the nether without overheating. You see, when you put an ice box in a room and fill it with water, the temperature begins to drop, the water freezes. You know, it's basically a freezer. I was gonna use the boxes to freeze water skins. They're basically these pouches full of water that when you freeze them, they kind of act like ice packs. The perfect item to have when traversing the fiery hellscape that is the nether. I filled them with water and put them in the icebox, and as you can see, over the course of time, the temperature of the water begins to drop. Now I don't know what any of this Celsius business is because I'm an American and we use Fahrenheit, but I'm sure that 22 degrees is pretty cold. At least cold enough for me to survive in the nether for a few minutes. I began collecting quartz as that was the main reason I needed to be here. While I was doing that, my screen began to freeze around the corners. I guess the water skins were doing their job a little too well. I went back to the house with plenty of quartz, only to discover that my beautiful roof was on fire! My guess is that it was started by the cobblestone generator, but I don't know why it started burning now of all times. I rushed to the tower and jumped onto the roof, putting out the fire as quickly as I could. I then took the quartz I collected and combined it with redstone to make rose quartz. I took some rose quartz, sanded it down with some sandpaper, and made polished rose quartz. I combined the rose quartz with an iron sheet and crafted an electron tube. We could now craft the most important part of our machine, the deployer. We were one step closer to getting our precision mechanisms, the necessary item for our rotational speed controller. There was only one more thing I needed before moving on, and that was an automatic tree farm. I was gonna start breaking ground right behind the house, when all of a sudden I was attacked by this zombie silverfish man. He had a huge silverfish for a head, and every time I hit him, he would spawn more and more of these annoying bugs. Eventually I was able to defeat him, but he left behind a swarm of silverfish. Once I was able to clear out the infestation, I began building the tree farm. Now I'm not going to spend too much time on this because this is probably the third time you guys have seen me build one of these, so if you want to see how it's done, just go back to one of the older 100 days videos. Anyways, the tree farm was finally taking shape. The saws were attached, as were the deployers, everything was glued, and I even powered it with a water wheel. When this thing was up and running, it was only a matter of time before it could start collecting infinite amounts of wood. The only thing left to do was to set up some sort of collection system. You see, when the saws chop down a tree, the wood gets sucked into the machine and stored in a chest. But how does one get the wood out of the machine without turning the saws off? That is where the portable storage interface comes into play. All I have to do is turn on the wood farm and it does its little spin around, and when the portable storage interface comes face to face with another block just like it, they extend, they connect, and the wood is transferred into the chest. Like that, I had an automatic tree farm and a storage system to sort it all. Next, I attached a couple of large water wheels to the side of the workshop. They were basically upgraded versions of the regular water wheel, meaning that they could power more machines. The only problem is that these water wheels are way too slow. In fact, they're half the speed of a small water wheel. So we needed to speed things up. And to do so, we were gonna need our precision mechanism. It was finally time to start building the first assembly line. I would start construction on the assembly line right behind the house. But before I could do that, I had to start clearing some ground because there was a lot of dirt I needed to get out of the way. Once all of the dirt was clear and the ground was nice and flat, I began setting up the deployers. To make a precision mechanism, you need gold sheets. This is gonna take a while. You also need the small and large cogwheels as well as iron nuggets. The deployers were going to place this right onto the gold sheets. I put the item onto the conveyor belt, and it acted as the base for the precision mechanism, and I slowly watched as the deployers placed the items onto it, and by the way this is sped up, it was way slower. I ran it through the assembly line 5 times, only for it to turn into an andesite alloy. I guess there was a 20% chance of failure? I began the process all over again until I finally got my precision mechanism. As you can probably tell, I was pretty enthusiastic about getting to this point. So enthusiastic that I began jumping with joy, because now we can move on to the more interesting machines, like the rotational speed controller. But before I could make that, I needed to craft a brass casing. Similar to an andesite casing, except this time instead of right-clicking with an alloy, it needed to be right-clicked with brass. I combined the brass casing with the precision mechanism, and finally, I had my rotational speed controller. This beautiful block was going to speed up every single machine in this workshop. Not only that, but because this is an updated version of Create, they even updated the UI for the block. See how you can raise and lower the RPM? That's going to make our block slower, faster, whatever we want. I'm just happy that we had this thing. The next part was the installation. I climbed to the roof because I needed access to the bigger water wheels. I connected the controller to the water wheels and it instantly came to life. You see how much faster it's spinning now? All I had to do was connect everything else to that one spinning cog and they would all spin just as fast. With everything connected, the water wheel and the controller were definitely doing their job, but the machines could be a little faster. It looks like the max we could raise it to was 32 RPM, and you know what? That was okay. It was definitely faster than before because I added a third water wheel. We had most of our basic machines, but I was still unsatisfied with the front of the workshop. It was still pure grass, and I wanted to make a courtyard type thing, so I began clearing the dirt and preparing it for more building. One of the couple things I wanted to add was a front porch for the workshop. I wanted it to look more like a factory, so I added this loading bay platform. But looking back on it now, it resembled more of a porch. It doesn't matter. It looks great anyways. After that, I began placing down stone for the courtyard area. A nice mix of cobblestone, smooth stone, and if you stack 2 stone slabs, you even get a new texture type of stone. Now I wanted to add some light fixtures because I just didn't want any mobs spawning and ruining everything that we've built. Lanterns were the way to go. I hanged them from the front, right next to the doors. I then reinforced the wall right next to the river that we had been living above. Before, it had just been a dirt wall, so I think this looked way better. I also added some light posts on the ledge, and then after that, I used trapdoors to make a safety railing. I even added some trapdoors to the stairs that went down to the river. Yes, our new hub was finally complete. We had a house, we had a workshop, and we even had a square. Oh, would you look at that? It snowed. Which probably means that our sugarcane farm and yep, that is exactly what I thought. Anyways, it's time to build an iron farm. Hello, who do we have here? Oh, jeez. I did not mean to hurt you, I'm sorry. Oh! In hindsight, once he hit me the first time, I probably shouldn't have gone up to him a second time, but live and learn. But they do need to go. I'm sorry, friend, but you were just in the way. Don't mind if I do. But seriously, the fact that I'm scavenging from dead villagers means that we need an iron farm. The first step for our iron farm is to make crushing wheels. Really large wheels that grind blocks up into a fine powder. The crafting recipe is expensive, and it does require a machine that we don't have. This being a block called the Mechanical Crafter. Thankfully, the Mechanical Crafter blocks themselves aren't too expensive. It's a good thing I was able to get brass in the last video. After this, I came to the conclusion that a machine of this size needed its own space. The mechanical crafter is pretty large, so it was time to expand the workshop a little more yet again. This meant terraforming. Lots and lots of terraforming. But after the dirt had been cleared, a lovely courtyard began to take shape. And within it, plenty of space to build mechanical crafters, crushing wheels, and even a storage area if we needed it. Yes, friends, this courtyard was gonna do just fine. Although there was a bald spot in the corner, so I needed to fill that in with a tower or something. Unfortunately, I had to stop. Due to the cold weather conditions, the corners of my screen were beginning to freeze. It was only a matter of time before I'd succumb to frostbite, so I had to sleep through the night. But come the next morning, I was able to finish the tower and essentially complete the courtyard. Although I did add a little detail to the outer wall, you know, just to give it a little pizzazz. Doesn't it look nice? After that, it was back to the mine for more andesite, although I did get more than I bargained for. There was this really interesting block that was just calling to me. Of course, I had to mine it because look at it, this thing was glowing. It was beautiful, and it was also a bomb. I guess when it comes to these blocks, you have to mine them from a safe distance because when you get close to breaking them, they explode. I honestly don't even know what this material's for, but it better be worth all the pain and suffering I just endured. I then stumbled across a tarantula spawner. Now, what's the difference between a spider and a tarantula in Minecraft? I don't know, I didn't want to find out. I was not going to let them hurt me. The loot inside the chest was okay too, I guess. With all the materials collected, it was finally time to construct the machine. It's pretty simple, really. You just have to lay out the tiles in a grid format, similar to that of a crafting table. And of course, there is the matter of powering the machine as well. Just make sure you don't overstress your water wheels or it's not gonna work. Now comes the fun part. Adding each individual item to the large crafting grid. This thing costs a lot of andesite alloy, but once all the materials are placed on the crafting grid, then they all come together to form your one big item. And in this case, I crafted a pair of crushing wheels. Yes, the recipe was expensive, but at least they do give you 2 crushing wheels for it. I mounted them on the walls, and I patted myself on the back because I was very grateful I added this extra space. After that, I had to follow some regulated safety standards because crushing wheels are deadly. This meant platforms, this meant safety barriers. You can't cut corners when it comes to safety. I mean, you could, but that's only if you want to end up like that guy.
0 days without a workplace accident.
It was time to power these puppies, and we couldn't put them on the same power source as everything else because by this point our factory was on the verge of being overstressed. So we had to give them their own independent water wheels. 1 water wheel for each crushing wheel. Once the wheels were rotating, it was finally time to put them to the test and see what they could do. So I went up there, tossed in some gravel, and went down to see what was on the other side. I don't know what it is about the crushing wheels animation, but it's just so satisfying to look at. With crushing wheels going, it was now time to add the next part of our machine, a cobblestone generator. One that would auto-mine and continuously feed stone into the crushing wheels. But for this design to work, we needed a new block called a brass funnel. Reason being was because we were going to have to sort items, and the funnel acted as a filter, allowing only certain items to pass through. And the reason I needed this, and the crushing wheels, and the mechanical crafter, all of it I needed because I was making clay. You see, when you crush cobblestone enough times, it turns into sand. And that sand, when washed with water, it can turn into clay, and sometimes there were some extra byproducts, hence the reason we needed the filters, because we only wanted the clay. For this to work, I was going to need a new assembly line underneath the pair of crushing wheels, so I dug a hole, laid down a conveyor belt, and began prepping the line for our new clay farm. Then all of a sudden, I was being attacked by this little goblin caster. He was throwing fireworks at me, so I had to put him down. With the goblin dead, I began placing chests and setting up the funnels. And the great thing about the funnels is that not only can you filter items, but you can also set an amount to pass through. Now this whole time, the cobblestone generator and the crushing wheels were working together and making a bunch of sand. I had been setting stacks aside to see if we could use them as a means of testing the assembly line. Let me show you how it all works. It all begins at the crushing wheels, which breaks up the cobblestone, turning it into gravel and then into sand. There's also a small chance that the crushing wheel can make a clay ball. So we have that filtered out right at the beginning. There's even a higher chance for it to make flint, so we do have that filtered out as well. The only thing left on the line should be sand, which is stored in this chest, and it's not allowed to come out until there's at least a stack of it. And once the stack is ready, it comes out through the other end, and it gets washed by the water. Once the sand is washed, there is a 25% chance that some of those blocks can turn into clay. It's a long and tedious process, but all of it is crucial if we're gonna build an iron farm. Because what can you do with clay blocks? You can turn them into bricks. That's right. This whole effort was to make automatic bricks. A beautiful choice of building block if you want to build any type of iron farm. It was time to lay the foundation of the next building. Like always, I began with a simple stone outline. I had an idea of how I wanted this to look, which is usually not the case. The floor was going to be granite. I mean, come on, granite is a go-to block and it just fits so well with the steampunk theme. As for the foundation, it looked a little off. I had to back up and look at the foundation from every angle, and I came to the conclusion that it was the bricks and the smooth stone blocks. I ended up swapping the blocks, having the bricks go to the bottom and the smooth stone blocks going on top. There we go, much better. After that, I added 2 wings to each side of the building, and once the wings were done, it was finally time to raise the walls. And like I said before, granite is the go-to block, and what pairs well with granite? Sandstone. After that, I began constructing the front of the building with these beautiful granite columns. And once I began incorporating the brick blocks that we had been making this whole time, it was my belief that this building was finally getting that steampunk feel. Although these 2 random guys just decided to rain down on my parade and attack me. You know, for a mod pack called Steampunk Minecraft, it's kind of strange that they'd include medieval knights, but hey, I guess this is progress versus the past. Once they were taken care of, it was back to work. The factory was 50% done, but we still had to add the machines. And there was 1 block I needed, and I had to go to the nether to get it. Went into the portal, and I was instantly blown up by a creeper waiting on the other side, and not only that, but he closed the portal. Thanks to him, me and a bunch of other villagers were now stuck in the nether. Not only that, but then I was being attacked by this magic man. Thankfully, he was a little clumsy and he fell to his doom. Anyways, this was supposed to be a simple trip for soul sand, and now with the portal closed, I also have to find gravel for flint, because I need a flint and steel. Thankfully, it didn't take too long before I stumbled across this really small patch of gravel. Now to get flint, you have to break gravel over and over again, but I wanted to get the flint instantly. You know, my ice packs, they were melting and I was gonna burn up. So there was one way of doing it through a cutting board. At least I thought that was the way. Anyways, I crafted the cutting board, smacked it with a shovel, and guess what? It just gave me more gravel. So yeah, it wasn't instant after all. It was a waste of time. After spending an eternity mining and placing gravel over and over again, I finally got my flint, crafted my flint and steel, and I was off once again looking for the soul sand. Although I didn't have to look too far because it was directly across from me, though it was being guarded by this giant robot-looking demon. I got a little brave and decided to fight him head on, and that was a big mistake. Never going back to the nether again. I hope I don't have to come back because honestly, I almost always die here. After the nether, it was time to go back into the mines. At this point, I was running pretty low on resources, so it was time to stock up. I even found some random minecart loot. But yeah, it was pretty uneventful. Got some iron, got some gold. I was even able to trade my iron ore for double the amount in the form of iron ingots thanks to this goblin trader. Back at the iron farm, it was finally time to start building the machine. So I began by placing soul sand as well as a chest in the middle and 2 funnels on each side. I then began prepping the iron generating mechanics itself. I connected a series of chutes together, that way the materials could all drop in one spot. Above the chutes, I placed millstones that would grind up our blocks. The setup was finally taking shape, but there were a couple of components that needed to be added, like the encased fan. And with that added, it was simply a matter of powering it all. Alright, now's the part where I have to connect everything and make it work, which is usually the tricky part, but in this case, I already prepped the design in a creative world, so I know what I'm doing. And then with the 3 water wheels in the back, our machine finally came to life. It took a while, but we finally had an iron farm. The only thing left to do was to calibrate it. The chests were a little too far forward, so I had to bring them in closer. Once everything was shifted forward, the farm was finally acting as it should. The last finishing touch I added were some trapdoors just to create a barrier between the items and the player. After that, I duplicated the same iron farm design on the other side of the building. With both farms complete, I could finally finish up the building itself, and I began by adding these nice trapdoor windows. It's finally time for the fun part, at least in my opinion, and that's building this factory. I began by carving out a bunch of windows because number 1, windows are nice, and number 2, I just wanted the brick blocks back to use them elsewhere. I filled every window with trapdoors because trapdoors look great! Better than glass even. I mean, look at that. How can you not like that? I then checked to see the progress of our iron farms, and they were generating plenty of nuggets. So it was time to harvest the fruits of our labor and repurpose them for the factory. I converted the nuggets into iron ingots, and with the iron ingots, I began to craft metal bars, because those were an ingredient necessary to craft catwalks. They're basically an industrial-looking platform that you'll find in almost every factory. Now, they were a cosmetic block, but they also had some function. I still wanted access to the upper portions of the iron farm, so I was going to have these stairs so that we could create this elevated elevated platform and access it. The only tricky part was figuring out where to put the stairs because I didn't design the most efficient floor plan. Eventually, I was just placing stuff down, seeing what worked and what didn't, and I came to the conclusion that placing the stairs in the middle was going to be the best option. After that, I began building the platform for the upper level, and eventually this catwalk was finally taking shape. I now had access to both upper portions of the iron farms. I went back to the clay farm and saw that we had an abundance of materials to work with, so I collected it, converted it into bricks, and began adding more to our building. And like I said before, I really want this building to give off a steampunk vibe, so I was gonna have to start experimenting with new building blocks. And what better building blocks to work with than those added by the Create mod itself? Like the copper pipe. I had so much copper to spare that it was pretty easy to make this decision. I crafted a lot of pipes and began using them as columns for the building. I usually try to hide copper pipes when I'm building them for machines, but wow, those look great. I just think that they really highlight the edges of the building real well. It seemed like orange was a color I was leaning towards, and what other orange block is there that you can get really quickly for really cheap? Acacia wood. And there was an acacia forest nearby, so I hopped on a horse and I rode all the way over there to get it. Speaking of horses, there were a lot of horses just roaming nearby, all of them with saddles, which leads me to believe that there was a villager tribe that was massacred, leaving their poor horses behind. Once I got to an acacia tree, I began chopping it down quickly as well as the trees nearby. I collected the saplings, replanted them near the base because I wasn't trying to make that journey all over again, and then with the wood that I had, I began crafting some of the first acacia elements, that being the acacia signs. I slapped them on the side of the building and they looked really good. I then had a builder's dilemma, one that I had to resolve on Discord with a couple of friends, that being which column looked better, the stripped acacia log or the granite column? Leave your comment down below and tell me what you think. In the end, I added trapdoors to the acacia column, and to me, that was the best one. But it's still subject to change. Don't forget to comment down below. I cleaned up the sides of the building, and after that, I thought to myself, how can I really make this building come to life? What can I do to give it that steampunk touch that we're missing? The answer was the flywheel. At least it was the beginning of the answer. You see, the flywheel used to be an actual block that you could use for generating power. But they updated it so that it's nothing more than a decorative wheel, and decorative wheels, well, that sounds exactly like the thing we need for that steampunk element of our build. Next to the flywheel, I added some gears. They were all connected to a mechanism in the back, and this right here was my favorite addition to the building, because once I added water to the water wheel, well, take a look. The building came to life. For the first time ever, we had a building with moving components. After that, it was time to wrap up the rest of the building, so I began constructing the second floor with windows up on the upper level. And then for some reason, my build site became incredibly haunted. I was fighting a ghost, and once the ghost was dead, I went back to the workshop, only to find Grim Reapers. I must have built on a burial ground or something. With the ghosts gone, I began constructing a massive smokestack right in the middle of the iron farm. I built a roof on both sides of the building, and then after that, I began constructing the very top of the smokestack. And for that special effect, I even added 9 campfires. Shortly after, I wanted to duplicate what we had done in the front of the building and add more moving gears. So on each side of the building, I added a large cogwheel, connected it with some gearboxes and a conveyor belt, and it was my goal to make the whole thing move together in sync. I connected everything to the first mechanism, and once it was connected, the whole building was in motion. All that was left to do now was to pave the road. Well, there you have it, folks. An iron farm, an essential element to our steampunk world. I'm gonna do something different. You see, I'm all about progress and innovation, but instead, I've decided to pursue a little vanity project instead. Airplanes. Now, there's one thing all aspiring aviators, including myself, understand about these machines. They are extremely expensive to build, and one of these parts requires us to go to the Nether. So before making the trip, I decided to take stock of what I had to protect myself, and honestly, it was not looking good, so it was time for a weapons upgrade. And when I say upgrade, believe me that this is a textbook definition of an upgrade. But before I decided to craft one of these beauties, I was first gonna need gunpowder. With no creepers around, it was great to see that gunpowder could actually be crafted. I was gonna need salt, which I could get by boiling water in a cauldron, although I couldn't tell if it was boiling or not, at least until I stepped in. Please don't try this at home. I decided to leave it alone and went to go browse the extensive weapons catalog. True to my character, I ended up settling for the smallest, cheapest thing because honestly, anything's better than a bow. After accidentally crafting 2 of them, I went back to go chug on our boiling water, only to find that all of it was gone, leaving the beautiful salt behind. All it takes is a couple of salt and some coal and boom! Gunpowder. I crafted some basic bullets, loaded my weapon, and then I eagerly waited for the sun to go down because I was super hyped to test this thing. No animals were harmed in the making of this video. It was time to prep the staging ground for this nether fortress invasion. I began building a bridge, and then I went back to craft the one thing I needed, a blaze burner. With this block, I was going to be able to trap a blaze like a Pokemon in a Pokeball. Once I entered the fortress, I remained cautious, vigilant, keeping an eye out for anything that could be creeping around these halls. It didn't matter though, I was still ambushed. Thankfully, I came prepared, and I was able to put down that wither skeleton with ease. Unfortunately, I was still succumbing to the heat, but luckily, there was a tool that I had yet to claim, a soul spring lamp. When you have it equipped in your offhand, it keeps you cool. Within seconds, my body temperature began to drop. I was able to freely explore the fortress, encountering a number of hostile mobs on the way, until I finally trapped my blaze. The reason I needed this blaze burner was because it was one of the ingredients to craft an engine. Not only that, but I had to craft a basic steam engine as well. With everything put together, I finally had my engine. But it wasn't good enough. You see, to fly a plane, you need an upgraded engine. And to craft one of those, I was first gonna need some magma blocks. I set sail, and I came across a couple in a swamp. Once I collected those, I swapped out the lava in our fan for some water. When you wash magma blocks, they cool down and turn into obsidian, which I then had to pulverize with my crushing wheels. I put them in the chest, and they went straight into the wheels below, where they were grounded up and formed into this fine powder. I collected the powder as well as the blocks, stashed them away, and began prepping copper casings. I then took a casing, combined it with some kelp, and made a spout. I took a second casing, combined it with iron bars, and made a fluid drain. With these two blocks, I crafted a small yet necessary setup. You see, with the powdered obsidian, we were going to have to pour lava over it, and we couldn't do it without the spout or the item drain. I attached a hand crank to a cogwheel, allowing the lava to be pumped into the spout. When I put down the powdered obsidian, the lava was automatically applied, but I wasn't done yet. The item was only half-baked. Now with lava, I had to take the powdered obsidian and have it stamped 2 times with the mechanical press. Like always, I overstressed the water wheels, so I had to take one of the machines off. After that, everything was running smoothly again. When the powdered obsidian was stamped down twice, it became a sturdy sheet. The last ingredient we needed for our advanced engine. After that, I crafted a couple more things like the hull and the airplane propeller. I then went to the mechanical crafter, put all the ingredients together, and for some reason it wasn't working. I was genuinely puzzled because I could have sworn I had everything I needed, but I was wrong. I didn't need regular sails, I needed a large sail. And to make a large sail, you need 6 of the regular ones, so it was time to go craft a bunch of sails. I went to the garden and harvested some of the hemp fibers that I had been growing. When you combine 3 of the fibers together, you get string, and when you combine 4 string together, you get wool. It took a while, but I was finally able to craft my large sails. The mechanical crafter was modified to fit the recipe, and after that, everything came together. The airplane was crafted, it was finally time to take to the skies. I went to bed, woke up the next morning, and I got into that plane, hoping to fly away, but you need fuel to fly a plane, and I don't know why this didn't occur to me. Then I noticed that the plane had its own menu, including upgrade slots, but above all else, it had a fuel slot, and I did not know what I had to put in here to make this thing go. I did a little research and saw that we could actually make fuel with the immersive engineering mod, although there were a number of items and a number of machines that I had to craft. It all began by crushing seeds with a mechanical press. This made seed oil. Now for some reason I thought that with seed oil I could just fuel the plane with that, but unfortunately it was going to take a little more refining. The first step was to craft an industrial squeezer, and to do this we were going to need all of those blocks that you see right there. I decided to start with the barrel because that was just made out of wood. Unfortunately, I discovered that I needed a special type of wood. For the crafting recipe to work, the planks had to be treated with a special type of liquid. You see that bucket of brown? That is called creosote oil, and the only way you can make that is by burning wood in a coke oven. And to make that, you need coke bricks. Thankfully, these were pretty easy to craft and we had everything we needed to make them. Once I crafted the bricks, I assembled the coke oven, which was arguably one of the most simplistic machines I was gonna build today. The only problem was, like the plane, I didn't know how to fuel this thing, but the interface did look similar to that of the kiln that we made in the previous episode, so I guessed it was powered with lava, which meant I was gonna need an infinite lava source. I would use the classic hose pulley trick, just lower the hose into the lava and have it pumped out. I cleared a space underneath the factory to make the conveyor belt as well as the nether portal. It took a while, but once I was able to get it up and running, I went to the nether to duplicate the setup on the other side. side. All of it powered by wind, of course. For the rest of the night, I ended up making small adjustments because honestly, I did not get it right the first time. But once everything was up and running, I finally had my infinite lava. Empty buckets would go on to the nether, get filled with lava, and then they would come out the other side and go into the tank. All that was left to do now was to beautify the area. I stick with the orange acacia log look, keeping a consistent feel for our base. I added some trapdoors as well as some brick walls, creating this basement-like area. And up on top, a system of pumps that would allow me to fill my buckets whenever I wanted. With our infinite lava, it was finally time to power the coke oven, and wouldn't you know it, it did not take the lava. But the question remained, what did I need to get this thing running? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I just needed to put the wood in, and it burned on its own. Slowly but surely, I was generating creosote oil, and when there was enough, I was able to harvest it by the bucket, slap it on a crafting table, and create treated wood. Although the name of that achievement did make me feel a little uncomfortable. I crafted the barrel, along with some other components needed to make the industrial squeezer. One of the more interesting blocks was the sheet metal, one of the necessary ingredients to craft an engineering block. I also had to craft a redstone engineering block. And lastly, the most interesting yet simple process, in my opinion, was the creation of steel. With the steel I made scaffolding, and then an engineer's manual, because I had no idea how to assemble this machine. Thankfully, the manual was very informative, and it even included an animated diagram showing where the blocks went. I followed the instructions step by step until I finally had the industrial squeezer. Now, the big question, like the previous questions, how do I power this? Before I went on making something that I didn't need to make, I tried the coke oven method and simply put the items in the machine. That didn't work. There was a power generator I had to craft, and the first step in making it was by crafting wire cutters. With the wire cutters, I could cut up copper sheets and turn them into copper wire. With enough copper wire, you could make a copper coil. And with enough coils, you could make a copper coil block. With that being said, that was probably the most expensive item to craft this generator. Now, how do I get this thing to work? There was a big hole in the middle, so I was wondering if I could actually power it with one of the create shafts. I connected it to anything that was rotating, but that didn't seem to be it. I referred back to the book and saw that the only way you could power this was with a windmill or a water wheel, so I opted for the windmill, and when I placed it down, it was invisible. I guess it didn't adapt well with the shaders, so I had to turn them off to actually see if there was something there, and thankfully there was. I then had to craft sheets to go over the windmill. Once I was able to apply all 8, I then had to search for a place where I could put it. Thankfully, we did have a tower with nothing on it, the perfect place to put a windmill blade. I collected the motor, attached it to the windmill blade, and while it didn't start working automatically, after a couple of seconds, it finally started rotating. Power was being generated, now we just needed a place to store it. Introducing the LV accumulator, basically a battery. To craft it, I made a bucket of redstone acid, this liquid that looks like Kool-Aid. I then had to go into the caves and mine some lead. Once the lead was refined and pressed into sheets, I combined all the items together to make our battery. I stuck it next to the generator, but for some reason it wasn't receiving the power. Turns out you have to toggle the sides with a hammer. One side for inputting energy, and another side for outputting it. The next step was to transfer the energy. That's where the wire connectors come into play. With some copper and terracotta, we could create these useful components that could transfer the energy anywhere we wanted. In short, these items could connect copper wires together. A pretty useful thing to have when you need power going from point A to point B. So I crafted a bunch of them, placed them in a row, and tried to connect all the wires together. But for some reason, once they were connected to another one, they couldn't connect to anything else. This is because I needed a wire relay. With the relay, you can make as many connections as you want. I placed the relays along the walls and started connecting the wires together. The goal was to transfer power from the tower to the industrial squeezer. And once I placed the block in the appropriate spot and connected all the wires together, the machine was finally activated. I put the seeds in, they were being crushed, and the result was seed oil. And yes, I could have used the mechanical press like before, but with this machine I could make way more seed oil at a faster rate. We were one step closer to making my desired fuel, biodiesel. But to make biodiesel, we needed a couple more things. For starters, a refinery, the machine that actually made the diesel. I went to get silver, crushed it into powder, and combined it with gold to make electrum. Reason being was because it was one of the necessary ingredients for a heavy engineering block, a necessary part of our refinery. I followed the instructions in the engineering manual and put my refinery together piece by piece. With the click of a hammer, the refinery was finally complete. Lastly, I made an industrial fermenter with some of the leftover blocks from the refinery. Reason being was because the fermenter was essential for making ethanol, another ingredient we needed for our biodiesel. The final ingredient for our fuel was nitrate dust, and the only way we could make that was with the crusher. Think of it like a more mechanized version of the crushing wheels. The crusher was going to break up sandstone and spit out nitrate dust. By this point, I was already running out of room. Thankfully, I had just enough space to build this last machine. I was so happy when the crusher was complete because that was the last thing we needed to build. Now we could finally get to making our fuel, but not before we throw in the sandstone and get our nitrate dust. The only tricky part was actually putting the ingredients into the refinery because the interface was kinda glitched, and so when I poured the ethanol down, I got really high on the fumes. After working it all out, the biodiesel was finally being generated. I sat in the plane, put the bucket in, and came to the realization that I just wasted hours of my time because it didn't take biodiesel either. So yeah, clown me in the comments, say whatever you want. It doesn't matter because now I was flying. And I'm gonna be honest, the flying is a little janky. Maybe I'm just not that good at it, but I'm sure with a little practice, I could become an expert pilot. I did a lap around the surrounding area looking for potential building sites for future projects. After all, we still have to build a railroad, and we need to know what terrain lies ahead. But yeah, and here's an expert tip for all of you aspiring pilots out there. When you're flying your plane, make sure you don't fall out. I misclicked and fell into the river below. Yeah, that was the last time I saw that plane. But you know what? It's okay, because I ended up making a new one. And what's a plane without an airport? I mean, obviously planes have to come back down and land somewhere. Anyways, this looks like a pretty good spot to put one. I began smelting more stone than I've ever smelted before. This is because I was going to put the airport on a pretty big foundation. It took a while, but once the foundation was finally complete, I began building the first structure. I then proceeded by constructing the hangars for the airplanes themselves. After multiple in-game days worth of work, the main structures were finally complete. The only thing left to do now was to actually prepare the runway, which I was able to distinguish with the help of some sandstone slabs. Yes, this was a handsome airport. And the runway? Well, I kinda eyeballed it, but I'm sure that's more than enough space for the plane to take off. As for the inside of the main building, well, there wasn't much to look at. I have yet to put anything in there, but I'm sure it'll serve a purpose eventually. As for the hangars, well, there was plenty of space for multiple airplanes. The only thing missing was light. It was extremely dark on the runway, and I needed a fancy way of lighting it all up, so I opted for immersive engineering lampposts. All I had to do was slap a lantern on, but before I could do that, I had to craft a light bulb. And to make a light bulb, I needed a special crafting table. I converted it into an engineer's workbench, and there I tried to craft a light bulb, but to no avail. It turns out that I needed a blueprint. Once I was able to craft the blueprint, I put it into the workbench and saw all of the recipes I could make with it. But today, I was only going to make light bulbs. After that, I crafted the lantern and tried linking it to the post, but for some reason it didn't work. That was until I slapped it with an engineer's hammer. I set up the post next to the plane hangars. After that, I attached the lanterns as well as the relays for the power lines. The setup was nearing its completion when all of a sudden I was ambushed by this horde of goblin people. After taking care of the threat, I began working on my power grid, placing down posts which would act as relays for our power lines. The sun set, the lines were up. All I had to do now was to make the final connection. Once everything was linked up, our airport came to life. I even decided to add some streetlights to our road. I know this is Steampunk Minecraft, and yes, we are gonna have some steam machines, but come on. It's pretty hard to turn a blind eye to electricity. I mean, look how nice this looks. The runway was a little dim though, so I decided to line the edges with torches. I worked well into the morning, until the sun finally began rising over our brand new airport. With the addition of the new airport, the future of our steampunk world was looking golden. All that was left to do was to inaugurate the runway with the first flight. I took the plane out of the hangar, put it on the runway, and finally, the runway was now in use. I'm still gonna have to put some practice into my piloting skills though. Gyrodyne. That's a word I'm sure you've never used. But what is it? Well, it's basically a helicopter. And in this steampunk world, it would be a sin not to own one. Now when it comes to speed, you'd think an airplane would be better. But that wasn't the case. The Gyrodyne. Wow. This thing was fast, it was super maneuverable, and its response time, it surpassed that of the airplane. Granted, the airplane could be upgraded, but seriously, this thing was a lot of fun to fly. And I'm sure it's gonna come in handy in the future. But until then, I decided to store it in the hangar next to the airplane. There was a lot of empty space in here still. But aside from that, it was time to wave goodbye to the Gyrodyne, at least for now, because there was work to be done. like weapons upgrades, because the small handgun wasn't cutting it anymore. I needed something with a little more kick. And seeing how there were still plenty of options, finding the right pick was not going to be a problem. But what if it didn't have to be a gun? How about a nice mech suit instead? A piston mech suit with the power to push enemy mobs very far away. It was surprisingly very cheap. Just a couple of pistons, some iron blocks, nothing too fancy. I should add that this mech suit is one of 3 that I'm going to craft today, but seeing as though it's the first one, it's probably not going to be that great. Now the movement is exactly what you'd expect from a mech suit. It's pretty slow, but I think it's a little faster than walking. I didn't know how to activate the special ability. It was supposed to push the mobs away, but they weren't being pushed away. Then all of a sudden, I accidentally pressed something and I went zooming forward. It was like I activated some turbocharge or something. Now, as soon as I discovered this feature, the mech suit began earning points in the maneuverability category. This thing was pretty fast. And then I discovered that you could actually trample over the mobs. Who needed the power of pistons when you could just flatten the mobs with your speed? So far, I was pretty impressed. But this little guy, he had a different opinion on the mech suits. But at the end of the day, beside our differences, we decided to just agree to disagree. The next mech suit was known as the Fire Armor, and based on the crafting items, it was probably obvious why. Once again, I was gonna have to go back into the nether, but not without upgrading my firearm. This time, I decided to go with a lockbolt rifle. Shout out to the person who pointed out that when I hold an item that requires both arms, I still sprout a third arm when it comes to holding stuff in my offhand slots. Once again, it was time to enter the dreaded nether fortress. Though this time I felt I was more well equipped to take on the dangers inside, but that didn't last very long. I don't know what the spawn rate is for the enemies in this building, but it's way too high. So many cinders, so many wither skeletons. Even with the weapon upgrade, I was still fighting for my life. Eventually, I found a regular blaze, which held one of the items I needed, a blaze rod. With one final punch, the blaze dropped the item, and then after that, I was quick to get out of there. Finally, with all the items, I could craft the fire armor. Now, aside from being made of items from the nether, why did they call it the fire armor? You could take a wild guess. I hopped in, activated the boost, and I was zooming past our buildings out to the landing strip. It shoots fire. That's right. The fire armor shoots fire. It has 2 built-in flamethrower cannons. I now own 2 of the 3 mech suits, but there was still one more on my list, and this one was gonna be far more expensive, because this mech suit required netherite. To get the amount that we needed, I was gonna have to make a powerful drill machine, one that could burrow through the ground, breaking dozens of blocks at a time. After all, with the Create mod, there are plenty of efficient ways to gather ancient debris. So, I began collecting my materials, including the components needed to construct this machine. Components like the plow. It was basically a big scraper that could break up blocks, especially railroad tracks. And then there was the cart assembler, a block that allowed minecarts to move entire structures and keep them together. And lastly, a minecart with a furnace in it. I began digging down, trying to get to the ancient debris level, but it seems like wherever I dug, I would almost always find myself almost falling in a pit of lava. Here's a second attempt, and oh, see, there you go. Can't get anything done in the nether. Who would have thought that digging down could have been so difficult? But eventually, I did find the level I needed to be at. I dug a huge space so that I could start building my contraption, and believe me, I was gonna need every block of this space. I began by placing the drills. It was gonna be 5 rows of 5 for a total of 25 drills. Credit to Doublesal25, I think that's how you'd say that. He was the one who came up with this design. Link to his video in the description. Now this design is gonna be a little tricky to explain. So basically, this is how it works. That cart assembler is going to bring this whole contraption to life. The deployers are going to place rails so that it moves forward. The drills are going to break lots of blocks, and that's going to go into the chests. And that's about it. But it's better if you see this thing in action. And that is not what it's supposed to do. Okay, time to fix this, and we'll go for take 2. Here we go. Second attempt, hopefully this is the best one, and it's phasing through, okay. Third time's the charm. Here we go, and finally, that's what it's supposed to do. That's the power of the drill, and as you can see, the plow is breaking the rails, putting them back in the deployers, and it's moving forward. Now this thing can go on and on so long as I keep supplying coal into the minecart furnace. It didn't take long before the drill finally uncovered some ancient debris. Yes, friends, I was set. Unfortunately, this small victory was short-lived because my lamp was running out of fuel, and eventually I was gonna start burning up in the nether. I went back to the overworld and looked at ways I could replenish its fuel source. To keep myself cool, I needed to put soul sprouts into the lamp. I completed a minor achievement, collected the 5 that the quest gave me, and now I just had to figure out how to grow more. For something that's supposed to keep you cool, the soul sprouts required an extremely hot environment to grow in. I went to go collect some soul sand because that was the only soil you could plant the seeds in. It was even noted that they grow fastest when near lava, and they were by far the most unique looking plants I had ever seen in this mod pack. With the lava source right in between all of them, I was hoping that these things would grow pretty quickly. For now, I was gonna have to make do with the ice packs in the nether. I even took the mech suit with me because traveling through the tunnel that the drill had made, well, by the time I got to the end of that thing, I was gonna be burned to a crisp. One thing you should know about the mech suit is that it's not a block. You can't break it and put it in your inventory. It's an entity. Thankfully, you could pick it up, although you did walk extra slow due to the heavy lifting. I went to the nether, entered the tunnel, placed down the mech suit, and as soon as I got in, I activated the super speed and zipped all the way to the end. Honestly, what would I do without this thing? I finally reached the drill, which was still going, by the way. When it came to a stop, I opened the chests and found that there was ancient debris just waiting for me. But I wanted to get the most bang for my buck, and there was a way to smelt ancient debris that gave you 2 netherite scraps instead of 1. And for that, we needed to build an arc furnace. In order to construct this super furnace, I was gonna need a lot of items, especially steel. But the main block of the arc furnace was called a blast brick. To craft that, I needed nether bricks. It's also good to recycle, so I took some nether brick blocks, put them onto a depot, and had a deployer break them with a pickaxe. With all the bricks and the magma block in the middle, we finally had our blast bricks. We were gonna need steel blocks, steel sheet metal, steel scaffolding, and lastly, I had to clear a spot in the courtyard because we were running out of space to build these machines. Once I demolished and rebuilt our old assembly line, it was finally time to start building this monster, and this thing had quite the footprint. It took up an entire 5x5 space. Thankfully, I had the engineer's manual to guide me through this process because there were a lot of blocks I had to place. The entire building process was pretty pleasant, and after that, all I had to do was tap the cauldron and it was supposed to build, but it didn't. Something went wrong. And there it is, that's the problem. It was the steel blocks. You see how the blocks have horizontal ridges? The ones in the manual are perfectly smooth and have bolts in every corner. So what could this mean? It meant that I used the wrong type of steel. You see, there's 2 types of steel ingots, one from Ad Astra and one from the Immersive Engineering mod. For Immersive Engineering builds, it has to be an Immersive Engineering block. And unfortunately, the only way to make this block was with Immersive Engineering steel. And to make that, I needed to build a blast furnace. After that, I played the fantastic game you guys all know and love, Guess the Fuel Source. It wasn't coal, but thankfully I got it on my second try. It was charcoal. It took a while, but eventually the iron was converted into the Immersive Engineering steel. And with that out of the way, we could finally craft the proper blocks, add them to the arc furnace, and then right-click the cauldron with the hammer, and there you go. This behemoth of a machine that we call an arc furnace. Now, big question. How do I turn it on? So many slots for so many items. I just want to smelt ancient debris. Well, I guess it's not going to be that simple. There's power in there, the items in there, but it's not smelting. So after a quick Google search, I figured out that you needed graphite. And to get that, you had to burn coal in a coke oven and then pulverize it in a crusher. Once you have the dust, you gotta roast it in the fire. And that gives you graphite. The next step was to get a rod mold. But before I could make that, I had to craft the blueprints that made all the molds possible. Put the blueprints into the engineer's workbench, and then I saw all the available options, including the rod mold. I was gonna install it on this pressing machine, and to build that we needed a new block, a conveyor belt. Once the press was assembled, all I had to do was power it up, which meant I had to do some reorganizing because the cables were getting out of hand. But once the power was connected to the press, I installed the rod into the machine, dropped the graphite down, and shortly after, it was pressed into the rods. Took the graphite rods, put them into the arc furnace, and finally, it was smelting. Although it was smelting very slowly, which was not what I was expecting. You see, a big machine like the arc furnace, it requires a lot of power, and this thing, it wasn't getting enough. I decided to leave it alone a while the netherite smelted to go check up on our seeds. And it looks like the soul sprouts had definitely been growing as they were twice their height. But I couldn't ignore the problem any longer. I had to go back, build some water wheels, and see if we could get more power. Now these water wheels were a little different from the Create mod ones, and once I got them up and running, they only generated a little more power, but not enough to make a noticeable difference. Now I could have made this diesel generator, but that was gonna take way too long. I'll save it for the next video, but that doesn't mean I can't prep for it now. I began clearing a huge space right behind the workshop, and it was here where I'd make a power plant. But, like I said, next time. By this point, the netherite scraps were finally done. And now we can finally do what I set off to do, craft the final mech suit. A made the ingots, merged them with the final parts we needed for the mech suit, and after that, my heart stopped because there was one more item I didn't have. Gilded blackstone, which could only be found in bastions which were exclusively located in the Nether. I didn't even know where to find a bastion, but thankfully we had a gyrodyne. With this vehicle, the search was going to be a breeze. I took it out of the hangar, went to the Nether, and began a perilous journey through the Inferno. And make no mistake, just because you're flying doesn't make it any less dangerous than if you were walking, because I was being chased, not by ghasts, but by super mosquitoes. And these things were relentless. They followed me for most of my flight, and they were just as fast as I was, so I couldn't lose them. If one landed on you, they would start sucking the blood right from your face. These things were a nightmare to deal with, and then I felt really dumb because I remembered there was a structure made of blackstone right next to our nether spawn. And wouldn't you know it, in the structure, the one block that we needed. I flew to the fortress and landed the gyrodyne on the roof. When I was landing, I noticed that there were spawners. I was really quick about running towards them and then breaking them. After that, I collected some blackstone and then some just in case I was going to need more later. All of a sudden, I found myself peeking into what looked like a large room, so I decided to dig down to investigate, and then I fell! Thankfully, I didn't die, but I was surrounded by glass on both sides, and on the other side of the glass, these ghost-like creatures. I was in a pretty tough spot, but before I began to panic, I looted one of the chests inside. After that, I had to deal with ghosts. I started taking out each ghost one by one, and it wasn't that difficult because I had a nice barrier to protect me. I continued to loot chests until finally I stacked back up to the roof, hopped into the gyrodyne, and then I made my escape. But not before being chased by these ghost vultures. These guys were fast, just like the mosquitoes. They didn't want me to get away. Thankfully, I was able to lose them. I was back in the overworld. I got the last items I needed. It was finally time to craft the third and final mech suits. For all the trouble this thing put me through, it better be worth it. And its design definitely was. That thing was radiating with power. I jumped inside, shot the flames, they were blue like soulfire. Guess that's why they call it the soulfire mech suits. And honestly, I didn't really notice the difference between this one and the nether one. They both shot fire, although this one looked a little cooler, but it basically did the same thing. So yeah, if you're gonna play this mod pack, just stick with the nether one, unless there is a bonus that I'm not seeing, but they're basically the same. Right here, this is the site of my new power plant. And this farm, it's gonna be the source of our power. Specifically the plant known as industrial hemp. While it's easy to overlook, this shrub can make a lot of things. Fibers, backpacks, concrete, even TNT. But most importantly, it makes plant oil, one of 3 components that crafts a powerful fuel known as biodiesel. And believe me, we need this fuel. When you burn it in a diesel generator, it creates electricity, just the thing we need to power all these machines. The windmill we have also makes power, but at this point, it just can't keep up. Knowing this, it was time to prepare a really big farm. We were going to have a lot of industrial hemp to grow, so we were going to need a lot of land to work on. Now, one thing to note was that this wasn't going to be a regular farm. After all, my specialty is the create mod. It would be a crime if I didn't utilize it in this farm somehow. So I began laying down tracks and prepping what was going to be an automatic crop harvester. A contraption that would automatically loop back and forth, collecting mature crops and storing them for future use. Yes, the key to infinite power all began here with this machine. Without it, we were going to have to manually feed all of our resources into the machines. And do you remember when I said that plant oil was one of 3 components to make biodiesel? Well, the second component is ethanol. And to make that, you can use potatoes, tomatoes, sweet berries. Now, some of this produce produces more ethanol than others, like the potato, which produces 80 millibuckets. Then there's a slice of watermelon, which only produces 20 millibuckets. So naturally, to get the most ethanol, we'd want to grow potatoes, right? Wrong, because potatoes only grow in the spring. For this machine to be effective, we need a plant that grows year-round in almost every season. That's where the sweet berries come in. They only produce 50 millibuckets, but they grow year-round, and a mature bush can actually make 2 to 3 berries. That's right, friends. We were gonna power everything with sweet berries. The only problem is that I didn't have any, nor have I seen any in this entire playthrough. So, it was time to go on a quest. The quest for the berry bush. I had a couple of ideas where to start my search, so I hopped into the gyrodyne, started it up, and flew all the way to the forest. I had to keep my eyes peeled, because spotting such a small plant from the sky was pretty tricky. It took a while, much longer than I had hoped for, but eventually I found a spruce forest, and in it, a cluster of berry bushes. With the berries now safe in my possession, I hopped back into my vehicle, accidentally set myself on fire, and flew off into the sunset back to base. I uprooted the prototype wheat that I had been growing to replace it with dirt. The berry bushes needed a little boost because they were only 1 block tall compared to the hemp plants that were 2 blocks tall. Once I had planted all of the berries, my impatient nature just demanded that I utilize bone meal to grow the berries faster. That way we could plant even more shrubs. I collected the berries I had grown and used them to fill out the rest of the space on the farm. I then created a sorting system so that we could separate the berries from the hemp. This was followed by the first harvesting test. Could the machine actually harvest all of these mature crops? And based on the outcome, the test was an absolute success. I was now auto-harvesting all of my crops. The items were then put on the conveyor belt and sorted through a series of funnels. With the first main task now complete, it was finally time to move on to the next big project, building the power plant itself. I laid a foundation of wooden slabs, and then after that, I began erecting posts to mark the floor plan for this new building. I was gonna need a lot of space, because as you know, immersive engineering machines are very big. I laid an outline of bricks, and then I thought to myself, hey, I should probably put the machines inside the outline before constructing the building. That way I can get an idea of how much space I really need. So I began to disassemble everything. And before I rebuilt them, I went back to the sorting machine that I had and began preparing the belts. After all, everything in those chests was going to have to go into the immersive engineering machines to make the fuel. Speaking of machines, I began rebuilding each contraption one by one. Didn't take long before all 3 machines were once again reassembled, but I didn't really like the layout, so I just moved them up against the wall. I then connected each machine with the fluid pipe, one for the ethanol and the other for the plant oil. The first half of the fuel setup was complete, but I still had to make the diesel generator. One of the first things I did was hop into the mech suit and go back into the nether. My automatic drill went rogue, but not before harvesting a ton of gold nuggets, which I needed. I dealt with some piglins, and then I collected the gold nuggets inside of the drill's chests. I needed the gold because I was going to make electrum, and to make that, you have to combine gold with silver. I took the electrum to the pressing machine and had it converted into wire. I then crafted the wires into coils, and with the coils I crafted a coil block. Just one of the many components I needed to craft the blocks to build the diesel generator. I then dealt with this illager that was annoying me. Eventually, I gathered all of my blocks and began building the diesel generator. Second to the arc furnace, this was still one of the biggest things I had built. Hopefully it was going to be worth it because building these machines, well, it was incredibly expensive. But as expensive as they were, sometimes the achievement names just made it all the more worth it. There it is! This beast was going to burn through all of the biodiesel we planned on making, and it was going to generate us untold amounts of electricity. Now it was just a matter of fitting the pipe so that we could pump the fuel into the generator. I contemplated a couple ways of doing this, but in the end I decided to go for a cleaner approach by just putting the pipes under the floorboards. Once the more complicated things were out of the way, it was finally time to start raising the walls of the power plant itself. And to keep things consistent with our steampunk town, we were going to be using good old bricks to build this power plant. Slowly but surely, this building began taking shape. To be honest, I never realized how nice acacia wood can be. When working on builds, I usually avoid this orange block, but here, it fits in so well. I added a few more details to the building. I mean, if we're gonna have a power plant, we may as well have a nice one, right? Speaking of details, blue and orange, they make a great color combination. I went to the nether to go get some warp stems. I wanted to craft them into warped logs because I just like that nice blue color. I was gonna use it for the roof. Look at that glow! For those of you who are curious, the shader pack is complimentary reimagined. Anyways, after finding my perfect block, I began harvesting a lot of the warp fungus, as much as I could carry, because honestly, I didn't know how much I was going to need for the roof. And unlike their vanilla counterparts, these trees, they are very, very long. There it is, in all of its glory, the warped log. Although I wasn't too happy with the texture. I didn't want it to look like a plank, so I had to create what was called a carpenter's table. Now the carpenter's table is kind of like a stonecutter, but for wood. So you place the block inside of the table, and there you can see all the potential textures it could have. For example, the warped plank, look at all those options. I ended up opting for something that worked perfectly. It was a tile block. Something about that tile texture. I don't know, I think it just fit in with the steampunk vibe I was going for. With my new blocks, I began filling out the gaps in the roof. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section about the texture of the tiled warped planks. Do you think it looks good? And once that was done, it was time to add some of the smaller details that was really going to tie everything all together. I went back to the workshop and disassembled the 2 furnaces that we had. They were taking up way too much space. But thanks to the construction of the power plant, there was finally room for them. I even had a couple of dedicated spots just designated for them. I added some bricks as well as some brick stairs just to fill in the gaps. Look at that, they look like they fit right in. After incorporating both of the large furnaces, it was finally time to finish the roof. I ended up opting for a nice glass ceiling, but I did want the glass to look unique, so I put it through a stone cutter and had it chiseled so that it could look like panels. Reason being, I like a lot of natural light, which is kind of a weird thing to say when you're building in Minecraft, but it's pretty relevant when it comes to shaders. Once I finished the glass ceiling, I went down to the ground level to evaluate my work. Yeah, that is a good roof. The walls were up, the ceiling was completed, yes. This power plant was almost complete. There are still a couple more things I want to add, but before I go crazy with the details, there are a couple of mechanical components I have to finish, like the conveyor belt. I still have to make fuel. I ended up linking all the belts together. I even added a catwalk next to the belt on the inside, that way I could have easy access to the top of the machines. Now when it comes to generators, they produce electricity, which is transferred via cables. And truth be told, I am terrible when it comes to cable management. This area, it was in need of a complete cable overhaul. You have the LV coil, which is the weakest, the MV coil, which is a little better, and then you have the HV coil, which is the best of the best. To transfer more electricity, I also had to upgrade the relays and the connectors. And the reason we have to do this is because if you put too much energy into one cable, it'll burn up and break. So, I went into the mines to go collect the much needed materials that I needed to craft these cables. And once I had everything I needed, I went back, put it into the arc furnace, and with the metals that I had to press them into wires. With the wires, I crafted the coils, which we could use as cables for our power. That right there, that's an HV coil, the best of the best. I went into the plant and I began figuring out the best way to organize these cables. After all, they do pack a powerful shock if you touch them, so I had to make sure that they weren't hanging too low. I added connectors to every machine, and the tricky part was figuring out where I was going to put the wires. To be honest, I didn't optimize the building in a way where connecting cables was going to be easy. So I had to experiment with a couple of designs, preferably ones that took up the least amount of space. I'm not kidding about that electric shock. Those cables have the power to seriously wipe out all of your hearts with one zap. There was also the matter of powering our machines with a windmill just to give it a jump start. I was going to have a cable go from the window of the factory all the way to the windmill at the tower. For this to work, I was going to have to create utility poles. You know, those wooden beams that have wires connected to them. Once I was done counting the spaces, I built the poles out of the wooden fence posts. I added the relays to the top of each post, and then after that, it was simply a matter of connecting them with the cable. Now, do you remember what I said what happens when you touch the cable? That's what happens, so be very careful when managing them. So, with the first pole connected, all I had to do now was connect a few more without losing my life in the process. I know this is pre-recorded, but regardless, wish me luck. As the sun began to set on my glorious steampunk world, I connected each power line one by one with the HV cables. Eventually, I reached the factory, and I was finally able to connect the last one, which would bring our machines to life. Just enough energy to give them a jump start, that way they can produce their own fuel. And it wasn't a lot of energy, they could have filled up faster, but like I said, we just needed a little zap to get them going. Eventually, the belt was completed as well. It was finally time. I went back to the sorting system, added a funnel, and let all of the seeds and all of the sweet berries go onto the conveyor belt. There they went off, in a beautiful parade of progress straight to the power plant. Now on the inside, the items went through a simple process. All began with funnels. The funnels would be there to organize the berries and separate them from the seeds. Once separated, items like the berries would move on to their own assembly line and move on to their respective machine. In this case, that was the fermenter. Back at the beginning, the seeds would go into their own funnel. Luckily, they didn't have to travel far because they would immediately be deposited into the squeezer. With the plant oil and the ethanol now being produced, we were finally generating biodiesel. The fuel was being pumped into the generator, and you could tell that it was working when smoke began coming out of the funnel on top. The next thing I wanted to make was a fuel tank, just in case we produced excess biodiesel. I started setting up the fuel tank outside of the power plant, and this whole thing was going to be made out of sheet metal. Once I got the gradual shape down, I right-clicked it with my hammer, and then it transformed into this water tower looking block. It was so nice that I decided to build a second one, just for symmetry's sake. These immersive engineering machines were pretty effective at what they did, so I wanted to make sure that we were going to have plenty of storage for any excess fuel. I switched off the generator. You may notice that I built a second fermenter. This is because the one fermenter wasn't producing enough ethanol, but with two, I finally had an excess supply. Meanwhile, back at the fluid tank, it looked like I was finally generating some reserve fuel. A good thing to have for the one season, that being winter, when the sweet berries stopped growing. Yes, everything was running like clockwork. All the machines were in sync and the fuel was being produced. And with all this fuel, it was only natural that we had to power something up. So I decided to add those last couple of details I was talking about and build lampposts right in front of the power plant. You may have noticed that I'm using the weaker cables for the lampposts. This is because they don't require that much electricity, and because they're not compatible with the more powerful ones. So how do we transfer electricity from a high voltage cable to a low voltage cable? Introducing the transformer, a block that allows you to transition between two different types of wire. But before I could make one, there were a couple of components I had to craft first. Thankfully, I had an engineer's workbench. I then crafted a coil block, and with the two main ingredients that I needed, I was able to craft the transformer. A great design for a very useful block. I had plans of attaching the transformer to one of the utility poles. At the time, I was hoping it would work because sometimes the cables can be a little weird about where they want to connect to. But everything worked out in the end. I was able to connect the high voltage cable to one end and the low voltage cable to the other. Once that was done, the lamps instantly came to life. The only thing left to do now was to start beautifying the area, adding paths and making everything look nice and neat. Well, there you have it, folks. The power plant. A place that will meet all of our electrical needs. One that's powered by automatic farming. Who would have thought that berries and seeds would be perfect for generating biodiesel, one of the ultimate fuels for powering our steampunk world. Thanks to this brand new generator, our ambitions were now without limit. I have a big problem. I want to get access to the ocean, and well, I can't do that with an airplane. See, if you take a look at this map, the closest ocean is surrounded by forests, and I'm not trying to chop all those trees down just to build a runway. So, I finally decided to build a train. This is just my personal opinion, but it's a lot easier to build over the trees than to chop them down. The first thing we needed was a steam engine, as well as a fluid tank which would act as our boiler. When the two are combined, you get a steam engine. It's in the name. Steam engines run on steam, so naturally you do need a heat source underneath. And the cool thing about the Create mod is that you can actually upgrade your steam engine so that it can handle more stress. But before making the train itself, I needed a train station. A perfect home for our beautiful, soon-to-be steam locomotive. It's a good thing I have a huge supply of bricks, complimentary from our clay farm, of course. It's about time I started using this clay too, because this chest was almost at capacity. I had the plans, I had the building materials, now I just needed the build site. I began chopping down many acacia trees when I noticed that my iron axe, it was about to break. So, once again, it was time for an upgrade. The iron axe with its 250 durability pales in comparison to the steel axe with 1000 durability. Gotta love upgrades. The build site was set. It was finally time to start placing blocks. I had a pretty good idea of what I wanted this to look like. I was gonna stick to the acacia and brick palette while incorporating some sandstone. At the center of the building was going to be this massive tunnel that would still allow us access to the airport. I also wanted to maintain the light posts that we had. I didn't want to mess up any of the wiring that we had set up in the previous videos, so this tunnel had to be tall. Anyways, I kept building through the night. I even had to use dirt instead of scaffolding because honestly, I had yet to see any bamboo in this world. Although I do think I got a little carried away with the details because this thing could have been finished way sooner had I not decided to decorate every nook and cranny. After a few in-game days, this train station was finally starting to take shape. Just like the power plant, I wanted the train station to have natural light on the inside, so I even incorporated a glass ceiling. It was a labor of love, but no station was going to be too good for our train. One of the final things I worked on was the platform itself. This is the area where people usually wait to get on the train. I added railings, I even added light posts. And after applying the finishing touches, the train station was finally complete. And here it is. Here is the building at different angles. We got a pretty decent platform on the outside and one nice one on the inside, complete with glass ceiling, of course. And as for the tunnel of the train station, I decided to keep it simple. The important thing is that I still had access to the airport. And just in case you were wondering, this is what the backside of the building looks like. Now this is great and all, but the only thing missing now, aside from the train, were the tracks. So I had to make my way back to the workshop to begin the next project. And this one began with a lot of cobblestone. It was time to make train tracks. And to make tracks, you actually need a steam engine. Well, not really, but our water wheels were overloaded, and the steam engine was going to be the perfect source to power our assembly line. Crafted the steam engine, and then I gathered the fluid tanks. All I needed now was a heat source, and a campfire was going to do just fine. I began setting up in the space formerly occupied by our immersive engineering machines. I just love how the mod devs didn't decide to make a whole separate steam engine block, but instead just recycle the fluid tank block. When you attach the steam engine block to the fluid tank block, it transforms both of them, making them into one. The steam engine was built, but we still needed water. Thankfully, there was a river nearby. With the help from some pipes and a pump, we were gonna start getting water from the river and putting it into the machine. I started building the pipe setup. With the help of some shafts and mechanical belts, I was able to get the pipes running by connecting it to a water wheel. To see if the water was actually flowing, I right-clicked one of the pipes, which made it transparent. Thanks to this feature, you could actually see the fluids moving inside of the pipe in real time. And just with that, all the water was going into the steam engine. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough. The steam engine was too small, there wasn't enough heat, nor was there enough water. So I had to make it bigger. I even had to add a second pipe system for more water. More water means more steam, and more steam means more power. The steam engine finally came to life. The engine even had a little gauge to show you how much power it was producing. We were on the low end, but it could handle way more machines now. Speaking of machines, it was time to attach the conveyor belts, because I needed a place to begin making my railroad tracks. I attached the deployers, gave them iron nuggets, and then I covered the sides of the belt with andesite casings. I put stone slabs on the assembly line, the base item for the tracks, and they were converted into railroad tracks. The creation of these train tracks marked a new milestone for our world. I don't need to remind you guys of the great train incident from my Create Above and Beyond series. All you need to know is that I was finally getting real trains. Eventually, I added funnels so that the materials could come out, be converted, and then go back into the chest for storage. Back at the train station, I started placing the tracks when I discovered a very useful feature. Instead of placing one track at a time, you could actually place multiple tracks at a time. With the tracks laid down, we could finally call this building a train station. Speaking of which, I had to craft a block called a train station. But to do that, I needed a train casing. And to craft a train casing, I needed a sturdy sheet. An item we had already made in a previous video. We needed crushed obsidian, so I gathered the obsidian blocks that I had and I threw them into the grind wheels. Once the obsidian was all ground up, I took it to the lava dispenser so that it could be covered in lava, and once that process was complete, I had to take the items, put them on an assembly line, and have them flattened with a mechanical press. I then picked up a barrel where I was storing the items and moved it to the assembly line. I attached a funnel to the side, and the items were automatically being converted into sturdy sheets. Look at them go. The beauty of automation. Our items were being made, and then they were automatically going into the chests. It took a few minutes, but eventually we had what we needed. Next, I needed to make more brass. I put the copper and zinc into the alloy kiln, and then I began placing the logs. Reason being, we needed to convert all of them into brass casings. Once the logs were stripped of their bark, I began right-clicking them with the brass ingot, making them into the casings we needed. And after we had the casings we needed, I had to right-click them with the sturdy sheets to make them into train casings. I mined our blocks, crafted a compass, and with that we finally had the materials to make the train station. I gathered some fluid tanks, more on that later, and after that I had to make a train controller. With the train controller crafted, we now had a means of steering the train. Lastly, I needed a cushy seat to sit on while I was driving the train, and the next step after that was to actually build it. At least a demo version. I placed a few more tracks down just to make sure I had enough space. And once everything was finally laid out, I took out the train station block and began picking a spot to build the thing. But there's more to it. You actually have to go into the block and set it to assembly mode to start constructing the train. Once it's activated, you take a train casing, right-click a track, and make a bogie. This was going to be the foundation of our entire train. God, they did a good job with this mod. Now, I'm not the best when it comes to making vehicles in Minecraft. I had no idea what I wanted this train to look like, so I just started placing things anywhere. My main goal was to actually understand how this vehicle was going to work, so I decided to start off with something extremely simple, a wooden platform on wheels. That was it. I know, it's nothing fancy, but come on, I need to know how to actually make this thing work first. So with the wooden platform, I glued it all together, added the engine, put the seats and the controllers, even a chest, and of course you can't forget the train whistle. Every train needs a whistle. I went to the train station, clicked assemble train, and everything was fused together into one vehicle. Now for the moment of truth. Does it work? I took a seat, accessed the controls, and wouldn't you know it, I got it working the first try. I took the wagon and brought it all the way back to the very end of the train station. Now when going in reverse, the train is pretty slow, but when you move it forward, it slowly gains momentum, and eventually it just takes off. I had finally made a working train, albeit an ugly one, but it was a working train nonetheless. After so many episodes, this right here, this was a step in the right direction. I mean, what is a steampunk world without steam trains? But I wasn't stopping here. We needed a real train, and this wagon, it served its purpose. So, it was time to dismantle it and start drafting plans for a true vehicle. The first step into making our beautiful train involved crushing wheels, and to do that, we had to reassemble our automatic crafter. Now you may be wondering, what are we crushing? absolutely nothing. We just needed the wheels because they looked cool. I crafted 6 of them and they would make up the front portion of our train. After that, I needed to make steel blocks, and one of the ways to do that was by putting iron in a blast furnace. So yeah, this is taking way too long. Another way of getting steel was by grinding up coke coal and combining the dust with iron. But to get the coke coal that we needed, we had to put regular coal in a coke oven, and that took even longer. A block takes 9 ingots, and I was not going to be doing that process 9 times. And then I realized something. To get the immersive engineering block, you only need 1 of the ingots. The other 8 can be any type of steel. I went to my lava fan and converted a bunch of iron into steel. These would be the reject ingots that would make up most of the block, though I still had to make 9 immersive engineering ingots. All I had to do was make a steel pickaxe with any type of steel, melt it down in an arc furnace, and it would convert it into steel from immersive engineering. With my reject ingots, I surrounded them with the good steel ingots and got my immersive engineering steel block. Next, I grabbed some ice packs, because I was going to the nether. Reason being, I needed nether wart blocks to make red nether bricks. Thankfully, there was a crimson forest nearby, so I hopped into the gyrodyne and flew all the way over there, trying to do my best to avoid mosquitoes. The crimson forest was in sight, and as I made my approach, I was ambushed by the one thing I wanted to avoid. You have no idea how annoying these things are. They're so difficult to hit, and they just latch onto your face. I was able to dig a hole and get away from them. I began collecting nether wart blocks, but it was taking way too long to do it by hand, so I decided to make a hoe. That tool greatly increased my mining speed, and I was able to collect enough for my train build. I then had to make a second trip to my nether mines. I hopped into the mech suit, zoomed all the way to the end of the tunnel, and found my abandoned drill machine. There was still plenty of netherrack, so I collected as much as I could carry, and then I had to make a quick return because I was burning up. I threw the blocks into the fire and watched them convert into bricks. I crafted the bricks into blocks, and then I merged the blocks with the nether wart, making them nice and red. Next, I needed flywheels, because every train needs wheels. Next, I created this thing. I don't know what you call it, but it's that thing that goes in the front of the train. It was a long and tedious process, but I finally had all the blocks I needed to start building my train. Now, I'm gonna be honest with you guys. I was scratching my head over this design for the longest time. It was so bad that I had to go into a creative world and build the entire thing and then copy the design over on the survival world. After so many hours of trial and error and going through design after design, I think I was able to come up with something that I was satisfied with, and I hope you guys like it too, because the last train I made was god-awful. All that was left to do now was to glue the entire thing. Now, you'd think that'd be easy, but that wasn't the case. You see, gluing a big structure like this is pretty difficult. Makes it even worse when you continue to add stuff the way I did, but come on. These brackets on the side really tied it all together. I got this idea from other YouTubers, and I can see why they chose to go with this design. There was one final thing to add to the train, and that was a headlight. So, I crafted one, slapped it onto the front, and look at that. I mean, it just looks like it belongs there. It was finally time to put the train to the test, and like all of our first trial runs, the result wasn't satisfactory. This is what happens when you don't glue your vehicles properly. It looked like our train had gotten into some freakish accident. It took a few more tries, more than I'm proud to admit, but eventually I was able to glue the entire structure together, and when I was activating it, I was able to move it in one piece. Can you believe it? Finally, we had a working vehicle, an actual train. You guys can stop commenting that the Create mod has real trains now. I'm kidding, I love the engagement. But seriously, I built one, so there you go. I was one step closer to my final goal of getting to the ocean, but I still had to build the tracks itself. I laid out a ton of cobblestone in the direction of the ocean, and then I came to a roadblock. Literally, an entire mountain was in the way. So, the question was, how was I gonna solve this problem? I had a couple of ideas, but before I began implementing them, I wanted to see how fast the train could really go, so I laid down most if not all of the tracks that I had in my inventory. It was finally time to see what this thing could really do. With plenty of track ahead of her, this train steamed forward. This was by far the fastest mode of transportation that we had in this world. The train came to a grinding halt as soon as it came face to face with a mountain, and there was the problem. So how do you get a train through a mountain? Well, obviously you have to make a tunnel. So I decided to attach a bunch of drills to the front of the train, and I just assumed that this machine would work like the drill in the nether. Although there was one annoying hiccup that I had to take care of. All those tracks I laid down, I had to break them because I was going to be attaching a deployer to the drill, and this would put down more tracks every time the train went forward. There it is, in all of its glory, the biggest drill I've ever made to date. Now I'm going to apologize already because this thing was extremely laggy, and you're gonna notice the frame rate drop. But as you can see, the train is moving forward, the deployer is placing the tracks down, and my frame rate is suffering as a result of it. But as soon as the train made contact with the mountain, it began to carve right through it. Thanks to our drills, the train was boring a tunnel right through this massive mountain. I even managed to break through and find a cave. Yes, everything was all going according to plan until I came across some lava, and I was not going to take any risk because I'm pretty sure the lava was going to phase through and burn me. I pulled the train out of the tunnel, went back into the cave, and found myself at a lava waterfall, one that I had to block up with dirt without getting burnt to a crisp. I made a tower of dirt blocks and plugged up the hole where the lava was leaking from. After that, I went back to the train as quickly as I could because mobs were spawning. As soon as I hopped in, I went forward and I proceeded to drill into the mountain, hoping that I would see the other side pretty soon. And eventually I did. I was finally through the entire mountain, we were in the jungle, and it wasn't long until I finally spotted that big, beautiful blue ocean. Our goal was complete. We had made our first train line. The only thing left to do now was to back up the train all the way back to the train station, which was gonna take a while, but you know what? I was just gonna enjoy the ride regardless. There you have it, folks. Trains. I have a sweet tooth, so to satisfy my cravings, I'm gonna bake a cake. And thanks to the Create mod, we can automate a process so that we can have all the cake we want. To bake our cake, we're gonna need eggs, sugar, and dough. I'm gonna start off with the eggs. The first thing I did was craft some cages because I was gonna go capture some chickens. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any chickens, but I did find emus. On the bright side is that they laid eggs. As for the downside, well, they weren't gonna fit in the cage. Luckily, I came prepared. I just so happened to have some leads on me, and with the help of said leads, I was able to wrangle up all the emus I needed. I hopped back into my mech suit and walked all the way back to the base, and these emus, they are stubborn. I tied them up next to a utility pole and left them there until I needed them for later. One thing I forgot to mention is that you also need milk. Now you could make milk, but real connoisseurs enjoy milk that comes straight from the source. In this case, that was gonna be goats. Why? Because I couldn't find a single cow. Plus, they look like they need a loving home. I mean, look at that one, he's missing a horn. Now, I've never had goat milk in real life, and to be honest, I'm something of a picky eater, so I don't know if I would try it, but if I did, you know what, no, there is no if. I'm not drinking it. But for today's purposes, it's gonna do just fine. I took the goats back to town and I tied them up. Then I left them there to go prepare the build site for the new cake factory. Don't worry, friends, I'll be back for you later. I decided that the best spot for this factory was gonna be right behind my house. I mean, come on, don't you think a factory would look awesome here? There were way too many trees. I just hate that they grow wherever they want. After that, I used the old water bucket technique to clear all the grass. Once I was able to clear enough away, it was finally time to start laying the outline for the building itself. But first I had to prep the road that would lead to the factory, which meant I had to destroy the rose garden. After that, I began placing logs, because it was in these logs where I would start growing my wheat to make the dough. I prepped the side of the future farm, and then I had to go back to the workshop to create a new crafting station. You guys remember the carpenter's table, right? It was a special tool that we used to get different textures on wooden blocks. Well, there was also a mason's table, and for that one we got different textures on stone-based blocks. This is just what we needed, because our building was going to be made out of granite. I took the table back to the factory, placed it down, and began browsing the large catalog of potential textures. In this case, I was going to turn the granite into these tiny little bricks. I then placed them on the outline, and after that, I began placing glass for the base of the windows. I then had to go to the wood farm and gather as many logs as I could, because frankly, I had run out of space, I needed to use them, so instead of making slabs, I just decided to use the wood itself to make up the entire floor. It took some time, and I placed tons of wooden blocks, but eventually I was able to fill up the entire floor, and after that, I used my axe, I stripped the logs, and well, there you go. I then began making these beams, but more on that later. You see that? That's flour. And when you wash flour with water, it turns into dough. And that was exactly what we needed. And all dough begins with a good farm. In this case, it was going to be an automatic wheat farm. I used a design that was almost identical to the hemp farm from the previous episode. Deployers would plant the seeds and harvesters would gather all the wheat once it's matured. I went to each deployer, adding seeds as its filter, and then after that, I manually placed the seeds in each deployer's hand. That looks good. That's right, friends. Our cake making process was going to start right here on this little patch of dirt. As for the power source of our factory, I was going to use another steam engine. After seeing how useful they could be in the last episode, I decided, hey, why not have one dedicated engine for every building? I had to set up the pipework to make sure that the steam engine was constantly supplied with water. After that, I added the heat source underneath, that being campfires, and once everything came together, it was powered on and we got rotational force. I added a rotational speed controller to modulate the speed, extra fast. After all, there's nothing worse than waiting for cake. There it is, the power source of our factory. Eventually the wheat had grown, but the mechanical harvester wasn't doing its job. Something was wrong, so I had to stop the machine. I then had to dismantle it and rebuild it because it turns out that the harvesters had to harvest the bottom half of the wheat, not the top half. I glued it all together, ran it again, and this time it was doing its job. The next step was to lay out conveyor belts, chests, funnels, chutes, anything to get the materials where we needed them to go. I even included a waste disposal system so that we can get rid of the unnecessary items like seeds. I then added a catwalk around the machines for easy access. That way I could see what was going on. When it comes to create mod builds, you want to keep a close eye on everything you're working on. One wrong thing could mess up the entire system. The next step was to prep a giant tank where we were going to store our milk. I then had to design a system that could cycle buckets. It would be a design that was similar to that of our lava farm. But instead of lava and nether portals, we were going to be using goats and milk. It was going to be a slow process, but eventually that thing would get filled. The next animals to deal with were the emus, who were patiently waiting for me. And just like before, they were still extremely stubborn. I had to walk them all the way to the factory, and then I tied them up. I then began placing 9 chutes where the eggs would drop through once the emus laid them. I layered the chutes with carpet, and then I went underneath to create the conveyor belt system that would get the eggs where they needed to be. Now here's what I love about chutes. You can actually link them together so that the items can fall diagonally. I set up the conveyor belt, linked everything together, and then I prepped the chest with a funnel, that way when the eggs fell through, they would be stored. Shortly after, I ran for my life because I had gone multiple nights without sleeping, and the phantoms, they wanted to tuck me in. The next morning was an absolute pain because I had to get the emus inside of their little section. They did not want to cooperate. Getting them up the stairs was hard enough. Eventually, I was able to trap the emus behind the glass. I then noticed something strange on my map. There were a bunch of horses, and they were all just standing in a line. I had no idea what this could mean, but it was worth exploring. I walked out of the factory and approached what looked like a giant crack in the ground. Now this wasn't a ravine, it was too small, but I'll tell you what it was. It was the perfect horse prison, because for some reason, all of them were gathered here. I don't know how they all got trapped in here, but I did find something interesting when exploring this little trap. There were mules, and the mules were loaded with loot. They had food, they had emeralds, they had all the things I wanted. It was all mine for the taking. I gathered as much as I could carry. After that, I crawled out of that ravine and made my way back to the place so I could unload my inventory because I was just carrying way too much food. But my main reason for being at the workshop was to gather some sugarcane. I disabled the automatic harvester, and then I began prepping a platform. Now this platform was going to be crucial to making our cake. I added stairs and trap doors because for something this crucial, it had to look nice. I then built a layer of dirt. Reason being, because on this second layer, I was going to be growing lots of sugarcane. With the first side down, I then began working on the second side, and after that, I began punching holes through the dirt to make sure that I had the optimal water placement. After all, there wasn't a lot of room to grow this, so I wanted to make sure I was taking advantage of all the space I could. With that water, I took it up to the platform and began filling in the holes. Now, I was following a chart on Google Images that showed me the best way to plant sugarcane, but I don't think I did it right. Regardless, it was planted. And after that, I had to upgrade the harvester. This one was connected to the main one below. I then began to glue all the pieces together. Gluing is so annoying. Once all the blocks were fused with the glue, I went down to the lower level, switched on the harvester, and in sync, the sugarcane and the wheat was being harvested at the same time. I then set up a sorting system for the sugarcane where it would go into the chests and be grounded in a millstone, being converted into sugar. I was one step closer to making a cake. We had the eggs, we had the dough, now we had the sugar. All we had to do was mix it all together to make our cake base. And to do that, I had to tear up my beautiful wooden floors to dig a hole. Now, why did I need to do this? Well, I was going to have a series of conveyor belts that would take the items from one end of the factory to the other, in this case that center point being a basin. It was in this basin where all the ingredients would come together. I added chutes on every side so that they could go in. I then tossed some of the ingredients in where they would be smashed to make our first cake base, an item that I would use to set a filter on the basin. After that, it was simply a matter of setting everything free. The conveyor belts would move the items in, they would be pressed, and we were automatically making our cake base. But the cake base was raw and needed to be baked. So I installed a fan with a campfire right above it to blow hot air, and that would bake our raw cake base. Within a matter of seconds, we would have a piping hot cake. The only thing left to do now was to frost it, and this is where the milk would come into play. But first I had to build a front room. I would divide the building into 2 rooms, with the factory being in the back, and the front would act as like a type of shop. I built the wall out of leftover wood logs that I had for making the floor, and then I layered it with granite. And shortly after, I began prepping the assembly line where the cakes would come out from the back end of the factory. Now this next edition was inspired by a really popular donut chain. Inside of their dining rooms, they have this massive glass window that you can actually peek through. And on the other side of the window is the kitchen where they make the donuts. That's exactly what I'm making here. I cut a giant hole in the wall, perfect for fitting in a beautiful glass window that will provide people a vantage point to see the factory and all the cakes being made. After that, I connected the last mechanical belt, and like that, everything was finally running in sync. As for the milk, I would be able to transport it via pipe. It would lead to the front, and as you can see there are 3, the first one being real and the other 2 just being for show. I then attached valves to each pipe, and if you don't know what a valve is, it's basically a wheel that's used to turn the pipes on or off. And I had 3 of them colored, 1 for vanilla, 1 for chocolate, and 1 for strawberry. And that's what it looks like when you spin the valve. I next had to install a deployer with a knife because cakes don't stack, but if you slice them, they do. I placed down chest, and then after that I had to set up the deployer, which was not in the right position like always, but thanks to my wrench I was able to fix it up, I gave it a knife, and it was now ready to slice cake. As for the milk, it was flowing from the tank to the spout. All I had to do was turn the valve and let the milk flow through. I threw a cake on the belt just to test it out, but it stopped moving. I guess even though the spout's empty, the cake's not going to move until something's put on it, so I ended up having to break the spouts. And that's too bad too, because I really liked the way they looked. Anyways, I threw the cake back onto the belt for round 2, and this time, the milk was deposited right onto the cake, and it was iced up and ready to slice. As for the cake, for something made out of emu eggs and goat milk, it wasn't half bad. The cakes even gave me the speed effect. Well, you saw me build it, now it's time for you to see how it works. It all begins here at the wheat farm, where the automatic harvester collects the wheat once it matures. Up on the second level, we have sugarcane being collected. Both the wheat and the sugarcane are deposited onto the assembly line via portable storage interface. After that, they only have 2 places to go. Let's start with the wheat. Leaving the portable storage interface, the wheat goes onto the assembly line and enters one of 2 funnels. And as for other excess items such as seeds, they enter a 3rd funnel, which acts as a garbage disposal. The wheat that enters the funnels is ground up into flour inside a pair of millstones. Once the flour is ready, it exits the millstones via chute. After that, it enters a series of chests, where it accumulates and comes out in stacks of 16. The stack moves up the assembly line, and then it goes over a water fan, where it's washed and turned into dough. And once the dough's ready, it enters another funnel, where it's then stored into a chest until further use. Back at the beginning, the sugarcane is entering a shorter process. It enters a chest, where it's then moved to a millstone. It's ground up into sugar, and that's about it. The next process is even more simple, this having to do with emu eggs. Anyways, the emus lay eggs and they go down the chutes. The eggs, coming straight from the upper level, are deposited onto the conveyor belt. After that, they enter the chest and then go down another chute where they're carried all the way to the basin. I finally had my sugar. I finally had my eggs. When all of the ingredients enter the basin, the mechanical press is activated. It squishes them all together to form a cake base. They then go over the fire and get baked into a nice toasty cake. The cakes then go onto the assembly line once again, and they move all the way to the front room, where they patiently wait at the spout to be frosted by the milk. Speaking of the milk, it all begins here with our trusty milk and go. The bucket then goes over a fluid drain where the milk is dumped, and after that it goes into a chest where it drops down below. The bucket is then blown up by a fan through a series of chutes. Once it reaches the top, it goes into another chest where it's then deposited into the deployer once again, where it clicks the goat with milk, beginning the cycle all over. Now we've come to the very end. All that's left is for the cake to get frosted, and once that happens, it then moves down, and it's sliced by the knife. I think it's safe to say that this cake factory is a complete success. Look at that beautiful parade of cakes ready to be eaten. I'm gonna have to be honest with you guys. We've made a lot of things with this Create mod, but this one right here, this factory is by far my favorite thing we've made. All that's left to do now is to build the walls and fill in the windows with glass. It took a while, but eventually I was able to raise the walls with the granite I collected, and I even made a roof out of andesite. Now this place does look like any other factory, so I do have to add a special sign so you know this is a cake factory. I hope that my little build here on the roof is going to get the point across of what this place actually is. And if you haven't guessed already, sorry for the spoiler, it's a cake. Hope you guys like the design because I am not the best when it comes to pixel art. There it is, the sign in all of its glory. But I had to build one more thing just in case even that wasn't enough. Up on the roof, I ended up building a giant cupcake. I recently saw the FNAF movie and I pasted off of the cupcake that Chica holds. Looking back on things, we have definitely added a lot to the steampunk world. The skyline is really coming together. Today we're going to be doing something a little different. You could say it's out of this world. All puns aside, today I'm going to go to the Aether dimension. Why? Because it's included in the mod pack. Going to the Aether also gives me an excuse to craft another vehicle, one that we have yet to make. But before I get ahead of myself, I'm going to begin this video by going to the Nether to harvest some much needed glowstone. I went into the basement, hopped into the Nether portal, and began wondering whether or not that plant had grown. I'm talking about the Soul Sprout. Now their main purpose was to fuel the Soul Lantern, that lamp I carry around in the Nether that keeps me cool, but these things took way too long to grow. After that, I left the farm, hopped into my trusty Gyrodyne, and began ascending way up towards the Nether ceiling. Reason being, that's where all the good stuff grows. I'm talking about glowstone. I spotted a nice little cluster of glowstone, and once I did make a safe landing, I began collecting just enough glowstone to make the Aether portal. I didn't want to collect more than I needed, cause, well, I was short on time. Back in the overworld, I scrambled all over my workshop as well as outside around the town, looking for the perfect place to put my Aether portal. But wherever I looked, it seemed like everywhere was overcrowded with something. So in the end, I just opted to build it in a random corner in the courtyard. The portal was activated, so I stepped in and wondered what waited for me on the other side. And honestly, it was not what I expected. I've been to the Aether before, and I remember it being, well, a little brighter. I wanted to see if the old rule still applied, and it looks like it did. That rule being that overworld tools are ineffective against Aether blocks. A diamond axe would mine just as slow as a wooden axe if you tried to chop down an Aether tree. I was then greeted by a hostile local, and without any weapons, I was ill-equipped to be here, so I went back, made a pickaxe, and began preparing for my new expansion campaign. I was gifted a book of lore, and I love how this thing works. Instead of there being chapters, all you have to do is put an item in, and the book, it gives you a description. I then went to go collect a ton of materials because I was going to be building something grand, and honestly, I'm getting pretty tired of making bricks this way, so I'll have to automate this eventually. Next, I gathered some wood, and lastly, I loaded all the materials into my backpack to save inventory space. You gotta love backpacks, and of course you can't forget about weapons. I lost my old rifle, so I decided to craft something new. Hopefully this new model would work just as well. And of course, I couldn't go in without my sidearm, and looking back on it now, I think my weapons were overkill, but they got the job done. With the enemies out of the way, I began terraforming the ground to start building my base of operations. I even brought my workbenches because of course I couldn't build something unless I had access to a large catalog of beautiful blocks. And with that I began setting up shop, a nice little base perfect for protecting me from all the evil Aether enemies that wanted me to go home. Unfortunately for them, I was here to stay, and for every block that I placed, well, that just further cemented my position. I ended up building this weird brick-looking house, and honestly, I wasn't that satisfied with the design, but like I said, it was a temporary base of operations. After that, I began building walls because the clouds were still bothering me, and these clouds were lethal. I had to clear them out every couple of minutes because they kept respawning, trying to knock me off the island. Another problem I had to face was that the Aether was very cold, so I crafted myself some campfires only to find out that fire doesn't work here. So, I had to come up with an alternative source of heat and light, because torches didn't work either. Even though I was still cold, at least I could see. After that, I continued terraforming because I had plans for an airship base. We're finally making blimps. Right before I went back, I discovered a hack where you could actually place a torch in an item frame and it would still give off light. I began collecting as much hemp fiber as I could. You could use the hemp fiber to craft string. The string, I could craft the wool I needed to make my sails. To make my blimp, I was gonna need a lot of sails. I crafted myself some andesite for my andesite alloys using a mechanical press, and after that, I began crafting all the sails I needed for the ship. And after that, I crafted the last of the required materials to make my blimp. I put all of the materials inside of the mechanical crafter and watched it do its thing. This machine never ceases to amaze me. All that was left to do now was to take it for a test ride. There it was in all of its glory. I hopped in, this time knowing exactly what fuel it needed, this wood, just like the airplane, and I took it around for a little cruise, and it flew beautifully. One of my favorite flying vehicles, to be honest. I went to the Aether to see how the airship would fare there. I began ascending into the sky, hoping to spot some cool stuff, and then I almost made a deadly mistake. Just like the airplane in one of the older videos, I almost fell out. Thankfully, I was able to stand safely on the upper part of the balloon. I cruised to one of the nearby islands and found a cave. Hoping to find some cool stuff, I proceeded and found this yellow ore called ambrosia. I collected a little bit, only to discover that this was the Aether's equivalent of coal, and I could actually make torches with it. I proceeded further into the cave with my new torches, when all of a sudden I noticed that there was a structure on my minimap. Inside of the cave, I began digging down when I uncovered this weird chamber and a chest with loot, a zanite axe. I didn't know what it did, but it looked cool, so I kept it. In the other chest, there was a zanite sword. But everything is not what it seems, like this mimic chest, an enemy posing as a harmless block. I tried defeating it with my gun, but it did little to no damage, so I decided to test out the zanite sword. After defeating the enemy, it dropped its inventory. I then proceeded further into the dungeon only to find what was called a sentry, and then even more mimic chests. Then all of a sudden, I spotted this strange looking cube in the center of a chamber. I didn't know what it was, so I approached it with caution, hoping that it was something harmless. I knew it was an entity because it had a health bar, but I couldn't do any damage with my weapon. So I decided to mine it with my pickaxe, but it woke up and it was not happy. This cube came to life. That's right, for the first time in Minecraft, I saw that the blocks were fighting back. As if the mimic chests weren't bad enough, I now had an angry cube that was trying to demolish me. But slowly I began whittling his health away at the cost of my pickaxe's durability, pickaxes being the only way to harm the thing. Eventually both of them broke, so I had to be quick about crafting another pickaxe without getting killed in the process. Eventually I was able to place my crafting table down, but I had to make a run for it because I couldn't stay in one place for too long. I crafted my last pickaxe, hoping that this one would be the one to do the job. Thankfully, this pickaxe was a lucky pickaxe. This guy was agitated because it was doing such a good job at defeating him. I whittled his health down until he had almost nothing left, and the pickaxe plenty of durability. It was a long battle, but eventually this cube was defeated. I celebrated my first boss battle by doing a little victory dance. It was great. He even dropped some loot, including a bronze key. Underneath the boss pedestal was a small opening. Inside of the opening, there was a chest. I opened it up with my bronze key and found tons of loot. There were all sorts of items, from weapons and these weird little gummies. I was decked out in all my Aether gear. It was finally time to move on, but first I had to play with some of the new weapons I earned. After that, I hopped into my blimp and flew all the way back to our base of operations. This was quite the adventure, especially considering that this was our second time in the Aether. Then, my blimp was being occupied by this weird little slime guy. I had to get him out of there because I was going to use the blimp for later. Then my game glitched. I was just stuck in the air. So, I had to leave and restart the world. After that, I had this little epic shader. I don't know what it did, but I'm pretty sure I just wasted the item. It says it's a shader grabber. Anyways. Lastly, I tested out this funny little cloud minion spawner. I had two little buddies by my side, and they shot cloud projectiles. Quite the reward. The first step for making this airbase was by first clearing out all of these no-texture blocks. I cleared out as many as I could, and then I began carving into this mountain where the base would be. I carved all the way to the top, hoping that this would be an ideal spot for building its foundation, when all of a sudden, I spotted this glorious pig. Look at him. Majestic. After that, I began constructing a wood outline that would make up the shape of our airbase. It was going to be circular, but I had to redo it a couple of times because I never get these right on the first try. I filled in the floor with slabs, and slowly but surely this began taking shape. I then added a sandstone outline just to start sprucing things up a bit. Next, I began chopping down these annoying Aether trees. I guess the timber mod doesn't apply to them? I don't know. What's even worse, I had to deal with the extra annoying cloud enemies. These guys were a plague. They kept trying to just knock me off the platform. Very difficult to work when you have these clouds just trying to send you flying into the sky. With the enemies temporarily out of the way, I began constructing columns that would make up the walls of this new base. Do you remember all those oak logs I collected before coming to the Aether? Well, this is where I was going to be using them. I topped every column off with a sandstone block, and then I made this ring of acacia. My next goal was to create this massive dome, and I would be making it out of the warped logs. Now, when it comes to spheres in Minecraft, well, they don't mix. So I had to use a website that generated the shape for me, and then I just copied the design. In the end, I topped the dome off with the ambrosia torches, and then I made this massive spire out of sandstone, all while trying to eliminate the clouds in the way. The spire was finally done, as was the airbase. Well, almost. There were a couple more things I had to add for it to be complete. For example, I still had to make the supports. It was just floating on the side of a mountain. Not only that, but this was supposed to be an airbase, and every airbase needs a landing pad for the airships. This was where we were going to land our blimp, so I began building a bridge outwards towards the middle of the void. The whole plan was that this bridge would connect to a separate little island, and this island, that is where we would have our blimp land. I built the platform out of sandstone slabs, and then I added a railing out of oak trapdoors, that way the clouds couldn't blow me off. My next job was to start working on the stilts for the airbase. Thankfully, I had enough logs to get the job done, and I even had the help of a ring that gave me a double jump effect. The next job was to start turning more sand into sandstone, reason being, I was going to start filling in all of the gaps between the stilts. It was going to be a nice smooth sandstone base. I began filling in the gaps with my blocks. One by one, each block was placed until the job was done. I then began working on the bridge once more by adding a little bit of detail. I wanted to make it look like the bridge was being supported by these fence posts. This was another one of those moments where I was extremely terrified where a cloud would come out of nowhere and knock me off. After that, I backed up to look at my work, and I thought to myself that right there, that was a pretty good looking bridge. Inside the actual base, I placed down a bunch of furnaces to smelt a bunch of glass, because as you can see, the clouds were still not leaving me alone, and they were trying to attack me through the gaps. So with some warped planks and some glass, I made a warped window. And look at that, the warped window has a beautiful texture that just goes with the vibe of an airbase. All swirly-like, reminds me of the wind. I ended up filling every gap with these beautiful glass blocks. Before the create mod, I used to think that warped base blocks were ugly. Look at them now. I was extremely satisfied with the end result. This place was all coming together very nicely. After that, I ended up placing some torches on the platform, and from there I did a walkthrough around the entire airbase. As you can see, I even added a spiral staircase. I started walking down the staircase, almost fell there. And as I walked down the spiral staircase, I admired all of the work I had put into this build. I hope you guys like the build too, because honestly, building in the Aether was a pain. So many annoying enemies, but as you can see, well, at least I hope you see what I'm seeing, all of our hard work was finally worth it. The only thing left to do now was to take the airship, fly it above the base, and take it home to where it would now rest on its brand new landing pad. I slowly approached the landing pad and began a careful descent, hoping that a cloud wouldn't kill me. As soon as I made a landing, and it was a rough landing, I got out and I was extremely happy that I was finally finished with this project. This took me way longer than it should have, but we went to the Aether, we survived this new world, we even built a funny little house, and above all else, we made an airship. Finally, we had the capability to explore this brand new mysterious world. Through its machines, the steampunk world is always moving forward, but it can't do that without andesite alloys. And how do you make andesite alloys? With an andesite block. So logic dictates that we need an andesite factory, but where to put it? I also have a second problem I want to address. Pickaxes and axes. These tools are starting to look like baby toys. At this point, there's got to be something better that we can work with. And there is. A power drill, one that can break multiple blocks at a time. But to make this, I'm gonna have to do some heavy crafting because this machine requires a lot of parts. Even ingots, and all of my ingots were gone because I had updated the mod pack and the modded chests where I was storing them all, well, they were removed. So once again, I had to hop into the airship, fly around and look for a cave. I hovered around for a few minutes until I came across this ravine. Thanks to the blimp, I was able to descend directly to the bottom. It was a bumpy landing, but she held together. And after that, I began mining all the ores and gems I needed, as well as repelling the mobs that would just get in my way. So once I had what I needed, I went back to base. My next stop was the power station, where we had built a diesel generator. I was gonna need a lot of power to start smelting my ores. Once it was powered on, I went back to the workshop and started using the arc furnace, the ultimate furnace that could smelt multiple ores at a time. Not only could it melt them down, but it could also mix them. With this machine, I combined gold and silver to make electrum, the required ingot for our power drill. And there it was. But I wasn't done yet. I had just crafted the base model. I still needed to make the drill head as well as some other add-ons that would make it more powerful. There were a couple of drill options, but I opted for steel as it was the strongest. The only way to actually apply these add-ons was at the engineer's workbench. There I was able to attach the drill head. After that, I crafted a large fuel tank and a couple of other add-ons that would make this the ultimate power drill. There was only one thing left to do, and that was to fuel it up. It ran on biodiesel, just like our generator. I put the drill into the refining machine where it sucked up all the fuel. With the power drill now fueled up, I decided to test it nearby, and wow, this thing was going to be very useful. I wanted to push it to its limits, so I found a nearby hillside and began flattening the terrain. I even contemplated if the area that I was working on could act as a potential site for our Andesite Factory. With this powerful tool, I thought to myself, why not? So I decided to take out the entire hillside. In no time, I was able to clear up a good chunk of this area. There were some holes in the ground that I had to patch up, but not too big of a problem there. I did have a ton of dirt in my inventory. This flat area was going to be the perfect spot for building anything that I wanted. Now the big question was, what was this Andesite factory going to look like? I mean, how big was it going to be? I decided to hop over to my creative world to design something that would suit our needs. And after a lot of time building, I think it's safe to say I designed something that would be perfect for our world. I also incorporated new blocks that I had never used before, like the display board, but more on that later. Yes, we were going to take our engineering to the next level, and to transfer our world from creative to survival, I had the help of the trusty schematic cannon, a block that constructs your building for you. And of course the cannon needs a table. How else are we supposed to draft our plans? I imported the blueprints from the creative world, and after that, I had to decide where I wanted to place this building. I set down a preview of the building onto the flat plane that I had just made with the power drill, though I didn't really like how it looked in that spot. The second option was the space that was used for our tree farm, though the tree farm could easily be relocated. I felt like I needed a building here, although I would have to demolish some things like Noah's Christmas tree, which he built on a live stream. Here's a clip from around that time in case you missed it.
This gift is specially pertaining to you. I put a lot of thought into it, okay? I am going to give you this light bulb because I think you're very bright.
Aww.
There you go.
Oh, hey.
What'd you get me?
I got you a couple things. It's kind of like a package deal, okay? So first,
But Christmas is over, so the tree has to come down. And what better use of a spot full of cherished holiday memories than by placing down an industrial factory? I mean, that is the best way to get use out of the land. And besides, I wasn't doing anything with it. I put the blueprint into the cannon only to realize that it had no gunpowder. So I was gonna have to go on an expedition to get some. I used the 4 little pieces of gunpowder that I had left to make some bullets. With these supplies, I was gonna have plenty of gunpowder in no time. I flew around on the airship, hoping to find some nice gunpowder deposits. And that didn't take long. It turns out that there was a surplus of creepers in my area. What one would consider a curse, I considered a blessing. But killing creepers one at a time was taking way too long. Thankfully, I did have a tool that could help me remedy that issue. It only took a few minutes before I had more than enough gunpowder to power this cannon. The next step was to prepare all the materials that were going to go into the build. There were going to be a lot of logs, a lot of sandstone, and how exactly did I know what I was going to need? Well, the cannon made a list for me. Every item with the exact quantity. With a chest full of supplies right next to the cannon, it started doing its thing. You know you've made it in Minecraft when the blocks are building for you. Eventually, a foundation appeared, but I did have to start crafting some of the more unique additions to this build, like these futuristic sliding doors. They look like something you'd see in a space station. While I wasn't going to space just yet, I felt that these doors were the perfect fit for our Andesite factory. We were finally transitioning to a more industrial, technological age, and it was time for our builds to start reflecting that. So I continued crafting new technologies like the display board, a block that when powered can display the names and quantities of an item, for example. I put these iron ingots on a depot. All I had to do now was to power the display board, and once it received that power, the name Iron Ingot was projected onto the board. Granted, the board did have to be a little longer, but it worked. There are so many useful applications for something like this. Because it updates in real time, you can even set it up to display train schedules. But today, we're just going to use it to measure how many items we have in a chest. You can even customize it so that the letters appear in your favorite color. While I was experimenting with the display boards, the schematic cannon was making progress. And after a short while, it was finally done. The Andesite Factory was nearly complete. Another Acacia masterpiece. Keeping true to our steampunk style, this building was going to be powered by another hidden steam engine. And as you can see, there is the larger, glorious display board just waiting to get started. And of course, you cannot forget our futuristic sliding doors. Here on the upper level, you may notice that mounted on the walls are train pilots, or cow catchers, whatever you want to call them. I I thought they looked really fancy, especially acting as light covers. Stashed away inside of the Andesite Factory was a name tag. Now what was I going to do with this name tag? Well, obviously I was going to name something. I typed out the words andesite alloy, and I was going to right-click those little Nixie tubes, you know, the little light bulbs displaying 0. Well, they can actually display letters as well, and they make the perfect steampunk signs. Once you right-click them, the letters are displayed, and there you go. Anyways, an andesite factory needs lava. So I went to our little lava farm and started connecting pipes that would reach from the farm all the way to the factory. We also needed lava for a cobblestone generator, because all great things start with a cobblestone generator. Now to some of the behind the scenes action. Behind this wall you'll see the guts of the factory, where all the real work happens. I'll go a little more in depth on that later. As you can see, the display board is working, although for some reason, I don't know why the upper line is more indented than the lower line. But when the letters reappeared, the upper line was still more indented. I did want the letters to pop out a little more, so I tried something new. I took some soul fire, threw in an ink sac, and watch. It turns into a glowing ink sac. I then took the glowing ink sac, right-clicked the letters, and now they were glowing. That pops out way better than the dull white. I ended up dyeing the lower line blue, light blue to be specific, just to make the labels color-coded. With that task out of the way, I spent a little time working on the cosmetics side of this factory. The Andesite Factory was finally incorporated into our steampunk village. Here's how the factory works. It all begins with the cobblestone generator. The cobblestone is made, it gets broken by the drills, and then it falls between a pair of crushing wheels. The blocks are ground up and turned into gravel, which can end up in one of two places. The first being a millstone, which will continue to ground up the gravel and turn it into flint. The gravel can also end up in a chest, which is also used to make andesite later. When the ingredients are pressed with lava, it makes an andesite block. The block then moves to a mixer where it's combined with iron nuggets. When the two items come together and are mixed, they produce an andesite alloy. The alloy then has one of two paths it can follow. They pass through a set of filters, which splits them off into two separate sections, with each section processing the andesite alloys a little differently. One option is for the andesite alloy to be combined with stripped logs. When the two items come together, they form an andesite casing. The alloys that aren't combined with the log are put into a vent and elevated to the second floor. In the end, both the alloys and the casings end up side by side, and for every item that goes into the chests, the display board automatically updates its quantity. Now there are some drawbacks, like the fact that I have to constantly supply this machine with iron nuggets. I mean, I could have made them with this method, but there's only a 12% chance to actually get the iron nugget and a 25% chance to get the flint. I really would rather just transfer the iron from the iron farm into the factory and just have the flint generated 100% with a millstone. Don't worry friends, we're almost done. There is one more thing I want to add to this factory before we wrap it up. I crafted wool, turned it into a painting, and with the painting I combined it with a crafting table. This generates a crafting blueprint. It's kind of like a painting but way more useful. Now the big question, how exactly does a crafting blueprint work? And how can it help us here in our steampunk world? When you right-click it, you're greeted with an interface similar to that of a crafting table. And like a crafting table, you can put down the ingredients and it'll show you what you can make. The difference is that this one can actually memorize the recipes and leave them there for instant crafting. The blueprint then displays an image of the item you saved based on the crafting recipe you put down. If you have the items in your inventory, all you have to do is right-click it and there you go! You have instant crafting. Now the blueprints aren't an absolute must, but they do look nice and they save you a little bit of time. I figured they'd be nice to have since we can craft some of the more simple create mod items with the materials that we were making in the factory. It was finally time to get some practical use out of this andesite factory. With all of the stuff we were now able to make, I decided it was only appropriate to start upgrading something across the street, that being our iron farm. You see, the iron farm was great, but it did have some drawbacks as well, like the fact that it would only make nuggets and I would have to spend a lot of time combining the nuggets to make ingots. But with all of the materials we now had at our disposal, it was finally time to automate that process. With our newly crafted items, fresh from the Andesite Factory, I began making some upgrades to the iron farm that were really way overdue. And yes, the process was slow. Very slow. But as long as the job was getting done automatically, it wasn't going to be a problem, with the nuggets being pressed into ingots, and I had to deal with the issue of getting them from the basin into a chest. So I set up a small conveyor belt system. And honestly, when it comes to create, this is as simple as it gets. Nothing too complicated, nothing too fancy, just a well-working machine that gets the job done. With the funnel attached to the chest, the items can now freely move from the basin onto the belt into their new storage space. And with that, I successfully upgraded the iron farm. It seemed like a pretty obvious thing to have, so I don't know why it took me this long until I decided to make an Andesite Factory. I mean, after all, like I said before, andesite is the fundamental block for almost all of the create blocks. Well, there you go, friends, the Andesite Factory. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video, and I look forward to a beautiful, prosperous 2024 with all of you as we continue to explore the wonders of Steampunk Minecraft. Once again, if you enjoyed today's video, leave a like and let me know what you thought down in the comments below. And if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing for future content. You can also support me on Patreon, where I'm going to be uploading the schematics for these builds. Congrats, friends, we just made it to the first episode of 2024. Be sure to stick around because there is more coming your way. Thank you so much for watching. This has been Doublesal. I'll see you next time.